Hey legends, welcome to Omni Wizard. Buckle up for today's story. What if evil Harry became the vessel of defeated Thanos? A like and subscribe goes a long way. Now let's jump in. Chapter 1. The vessel. The cell was 12 feet by 9. Harry had measured it the old way, heel to toe, slow and deliberate on his first morning, before he understood that counting things was how the mind kept itself from dissolving. 12 by 9. Stone floor, stone ceiling, one iron door with a slot at the bottom for food. A single torch in the corridor. Outside, that bled orange light through the door's rusted grate in a stripe across the floor. When that stripe reached the far wall, it was noon. When it disappeared, night had come. He'd been here for 2 years, 3 months, and 11 days. No Dementors. The new ministry had abolished them. Great progressive reform, they'd called it, and the prophet had run it on the front page with a photograph of Kingsley Shacklebolt looking appropriately solemn and statesmanlike. Harry had been in this cell when that edition was printed. He knew because Williamson, the less cruel of his 2 rotating guards, had slid the newspaper through the slot along with his morning bread. Maybe as a joke, maybe as a kindness. The distinction had stopped mattering around month 4. No Dementors, but Azkaban without them was still Azkaban. The island was the punishment. The sea around it was the punishment. The sound of it, that constant, low, grinding collision of wave against rock, like the world clearing its throat forever, was the punishment. They'd just made it more civilized, more defensible in front of a Wisengamot. Harry sat with his back against the wall, knees up, wrists resting on them loosely. He wasn't thinking about anything in particular. That was something he'd learned to do, to sit in genuine blankness, not meditation, not reflection, just nothing. A mind like still water. It was harder than it sounded. It had taken him most of the first year. The charges had been creative, he'd give them that much. Unauthorized use of dark magic during the final battle. Destruction of protected magical heritage sites. That one had made him laugh, genuinely laugh, the first time he'd heard it read aloud in that echoing chamber, because apparently the Chamber of Secrets was a protected heritage site, and he'd compromised its structural integrity back when he was 12 years old. There were 17 counts in total. Thickness's successor, a woman named Evander Galt, who had somehow survived 3 regime changes by being precisely as useful as necessary to whoever was in charge, had prosecuted him personally. The Wisengamot had deliberated for 6 hours, guilty on 11 counts. 15 years, non-transferable, non-reducible. Ron had been in the gallery. Harry had seen him when they'd let him in, that red hair, that familiar broad shape, and for one sick, lurching moment his heart had done the old thing, the automatic thing, the thing it had been doing since they were 11 years old. Then Ron had looked away, not dramatically, not with shame or anger. Just the way you look away from something uncomfortable in a shop window when you realize you've been staring too long. Hermione hadn't been there at all. He'd thought about that for a long time in the early months, all the possible reasons. She was fighting it through other channels. She'd been threatened. She was building a case. She must be. By month 7, he'd stopped building her reasons for her. What remained, after you stripped away the grief and the rage and the particular grinding humiliation of having your entire life's work used as evidence against you, was something much simpler and much more dangerous. Not hatred. Hatred was hot and wet, and it wore you down. What Harry had found underneath all of it was something cold and perfectly geometric, like a blade that had been folded so many times it had forgotten it was ever raw metal. He had given them everything. He understood now, with the clear-eyed calm of a man who has had 27 months to think, what that had always meant to them. Not sacrifice in any meaningful sense. Not heroism, not love, not choice. Utility. He had been useful, and then he had stopped being useful in the right ways, and so the machinery had processed him accordingly. The ministry needed someone to blame for the damage. The Wisengamot needed a performance of justice. The prophet needed a story that wasn't just relentless coverage of mass graves. Harry Potter, chosen one, turned cautionary tale. It was almost elegant. He closed his eyes. The sea ground on outside. The torchlight stripe had not yet reached noon. That was when he felt it. Not pain, not exactly. Something more like pressure, but from a direction that didn't correspond to any physical dimension. As if something very large and very heavy was pressing against the inside of the air directly above his chest. He opened his eyes. The cell looked the same. The stripe of torchlight. The iron door, the smell of salt and old stone. The pressure increased. Harry didn't move. He'd learned not to react to strange things until he understood them, a lesson the war had taught him with considerable brutality. He breathed slowly and let his attention move toward the feeling rather than away from it, the way you'd lower a hand toward a dog you weren't sure about. Interesting, something said. It wasn't a voice. It was more like a thought arriving in his mind that was shaped wrong, too heavy, too vast, carrying the echo of something enormous behind it, like hearing one note plucked on a string that was somehow a mile long. Harry's jaw tightened. "Who are you?" he said it quietly, not frightened. He was so far past frightened that it was almost funny. "I am what remains," the not voice said, "a soul without a body, a will without a world. I was defeated, stripped, unmade, scattered, and for what your kind measures as years I have drifted. Looking for what? A vessel worth inhabiting." A pause, and then something that might have been a kind of dark humor pressed through the connection. "I have rejected many. You are the first I have found who did not immediately begin to bargain or weep." Harry considered that. "What exactly would you be offering if I were bargaining?" "Power, the kind that ends arguments." Another pause. "But I think you already know that is not what interests you." That was sharp enough to land. Harry's eyes were still fixed on the middle distance, not really seeing the cell. "Then what do you think interests me?" "The same thing that has always driven those who are truly dangerous," the presence said, and now it was closer, pressing gently at the edges of his awareness like a tide testing a shore. "Proof. You want proof that you were not wrong to care. Or failing that, and I believe you are closer to failing that than you know, you want the world to understand precisely what it cost." Harry was quiet for a long moment. "What are you?" he asked again, differently this time. "I was called Thanos," the presence said. "I was a titan. I held the full power of all 6 infinity stones in my hand. I remade the universe with a thought. I was certain, more certain than I have ever been of anything, that I was right. The weight behind it shifted, changed timbre, something that was not quite grief and not quite fury but lived in the neighborhood of both. And I was unmade by children who refused to accept the math." Harry almost smiled. It pulled at something unexpected in his chest, recognition of all things. "They're annoying that way. They are persistent," Thanos agreed. "It is their greatest weapon and their most maddening quality." "So your grand plan, your great certainty." Harry tilted his head. "You think you were right." The presence was quiet for long enough that Harry began to think it wouldn't answer. "Then I think I was solving the right problem with a catastrophically wrong method. The distinction matters less than I expected it would. The outcome is the same. I am here, in a prison cell on a rock in the sea, in a world I did not know existed, asking a mortal if he will share his body with the ghost of a dead god." "You're not asking," Harry said. "You've been pressed up against me for the last 5 minutes and you haven't taken anything, which means you can't or you won't. Either way, it means I have a choice." Another pause, longer this time. "Yes, why me?" Harry asked. "Specifically, you said you've been looking." "Because the presence said you sat in a cell for over 2 years and you did not break. Not because you are strong, though you are, but because the thing they were trying to break was not what they thought it was. They thought they were punishing a hero. They were sharpening a blade." Harry looked down at his hands, wandless because they'd taken it at sentencing. Bare palms, a few old scars white against his skin, knuckles a little rough from the cold. "And if I say no, then I drift on," Thanos said simply. "And you serve 12 more years, walk out of this cell into a world that has already built its comfortable story about you, and live whatever life remains to someone who has been so thoroughly processed by history." Harry let that sit. The torchlight stripe had just touched noon. "What would it feel like?" he asked. "The merging. Painful," Thanos said, without hesitation, without softening it, "like having a second skeleton pushed into the space where your first one already is. The mind adjusts faster than the body. There will be a period where we are both speaking at once and neither of us is sure which thoughts belong to whom. That passes. What remains is clarity. My experience, my knowledge, my capacity for power, filtered through your existing magical framework. You will not become me. I will not become you. We will become something neither of us is yet. Something better, something more," Thanos said. "Whether that constitutes better depends entirely on what you intend to do with it." Harry stood up. He did it smoothly, no stiffness despite the cold and the stone and the months of poor sleep. He crossed to the iron door and pressed his palm flat against it. On the other side, about 10 feet down the corridor, Williamson would be sitting at his post with a cup of tea and a 2-day-old crossword. Harry had heard him do crossword clues aloud for 2 years. He'd learned to find it companionable. "I want one thing clear before we do this," Harry said quietly. "Speak. I am not a tool." His voice was very level. "Not for you, not for anyone. If this merger means I trade one set of chains for another, then you can keep drifting." The presence was silent. "Then, I had a universe of servants and worshippers, and I was the loneliest thing alive," Thanos said. "I have no interest in another servant. I want a partner. I want to understand how someone your size, in a cell this small, managed to frighten me the moment I found him." Harry considered his palm against the cold iron. "All right," he said. "Do it." What followed was almost nothing. A moment of stillness, a held breath, and then Thanos entered him like a tide coming in all at once. The pain was exactly as described and nothing like he'd been prepared for. It was total and structural, as though every cell in his body was briefly being asked to contain twice what it was built for. Harry's back hit the wall. He didn't fall, didn't collapse, but he needed the wall the way you need a wall when the floor tilts unexpectedly. His vision went white, then a deep, impossible violet, then resolved back into the gray of the cell, but with every surface somehow more present, more solid, more dimensional, as though he'd been seeing the world through gauze his whole life and someone had finally taken it away. He could feel the magic, his own, familiar as breathing, but it was different now. Before, it had been like a river, a current he moved with and directed. Now it was more like standing in the river was standing inside the water, being the water, understanding the water from the molecular level outward. He raised his right hand and looked at it, and for a moment he saw it doubled, his own line, scarred hand and overlaid, ghost-transparent, something vast and gray and ancient. "Right," he said. His voice came out the same. He'd half expected it to change. "Your voice is your own," Thanos said, from somewhere deep inside his chest rather than pressing against it from outside. "I am not a possession. I am a presence. Think of me as a very loud second opinion." "I'll add that to the list of things that have tried to live in my head," Harry said. "You're in decent company." He felt something that was not quite humor ripple through his awareness. Coming from Thanos, it felt like tectonic plates shifting. Harry turned his attention to the cell door. He looked at it, really looked at it, and felt the magic in the lock, the spells layered in the iron itself, the ward anchors buried in the stone around the frame. Before, it would have been like trying to untangle a knot in the dark. Now he could see every thread. He could see the exact point where pulling this one and releasing that one would collapse the entire structure in about a second and a half. He did it. The lock clicked, the door swung open. In the corridor, Williamson's chair scraped back. Harry stepped out calmly, and the guard saw his face and went very still in the particular way that people go still when something has shifted in the world that they don't have a category for. "Potter," Williamson said. "How did you?" "I'm leaving," Harry said. It was a simple statement of fact. He walked past Williamson without breaking stride. Williamson raised his wand. It was a genuinely brave thing to do, Harry thought, respect where it was due. The man was terrified, and he raised his wand anyway because he was a guard, and it was his post, and that mattered to him. Harry reached back with a thought, barely a thought, more the intention of one, and the wand twisted gently out of Williamson's grip and floated to Harry's open hand. He looked at it. 11 inches, willow, pliable. Not his, and he didn't need it, but it seemed rude to leave the man disarmed in an empty cell block. He set it floating back. "Go home," he told Williamson. "Tell them what you saw. Tell them exactly." "Don't," and here something genuine crept into his voice, something human through the cold. "Don't be here when I'm done. You're one of the decent ones." Williamson stared at him with wide eyes and a jawline doing extraordinary things. Harry walked on. The cell block had 2 more guards at the far end, and those ones were not among the decent ones. Harry had spent 27 months memorizing the rotation and the personalities and the casual cruelties. These 2, Farrell and Bright, had been the ones who'd kicked his food tray through the slot on the mornings when they felt like it, who'd had loud conversations directly outside his grate about how long life sentences could be extended for disciplinary infractions. One of them had pissed on the newspaper Williamson had given him. Not a big thing, not torture, just the grinding, daily arithmetic of petty power. They saw him and both wands came up simultaneously. Bright shouted something, an alarm incantation, bright orange sparks bursting from his wand tip. Harry caught the alarm spell in one hand. The sparks sat in his palm, hissing, and he looked at them for a moment with something like academic interest. Then he closed his fingers and the spell died. "They have a ward collapse failsafe," Thanos told him, reading the magical infrastructure of the building the way Harry had just learned to do. The sparks were triggering it. "If the signal reaches the outer ward stone, every cell in the block seals and the building goes into lockdown. You would need to bring the stone walls down to exit." "I know," Harry said. "I just didn't feel like running." He looked at Farrell and Bright. They were already casting full body bindings, conjured barriers, the serious emergency protocols. 2 trained combat qualified aurors, not soft men, not desk workers. They were frightened, but they were fighting through it. Harry walked through everything they threw at him. Not shielding, not deflecting, not countering. The spells hit him, hit the new thing he was, and ran off like water from hot stone. He felt them, felt each one as a kind of tap, a light impact, and then they were gone. One of them, a particularly focused blasting curse from Bright that would have taken a door off its hinges, impacted his shoulder and sat there for a quarter second as a brief warmth before dispersing. He stopped 4 feet from them. Farrell tried a leg locker. It didn't take. "I remember you," Harry said to Bright, quite conversationally. You used to say you'd personally extend my sentence for every complaint I filed. He tilted his head. Joke was on both of us. I never filed any complaints. Bright's face had gone the color of old chalk. My wand, Harry said, not to either of them specifically, to the building. There was a half-second of nothing, and then the storage room 2 doors down. He could feel its contents the way you feel objects in a room when someone turns the lights on, swung open of its own accord, and a familiar wand came sailing down the corridor and dropped into his open hand. Holly and Phoenix feather, 11 inches, nice and supple. He hadn't held it in over 2 years. The feeling that moved through him when his fingers closed around it was not simple or clean or anything he had adequate words for. It was his. Through everything that had been taken, they'd kept his wand in the storage room 20 feet from his cell, catalogued and tagged and filed, and it was still his and it still recognized him. The warmth that ran up his arm was the only wholly uncomplicated thing he'd felt in months. Sentiment, Thanos observed not unkindly. Yes, Harry agreed. Completely. He looked at Farrell and Bright one last time. They hadn't moved. They didn't appear capable of moving. If either of you were planning a career change, he said, I'd start looking at options. He walked to the end of the corridor, took the stairs, and went up through the 4 remaining levels of Azkaban's inner keep without hurrying. The ward alarms were going off now. He'd let Bright's sparks do their work after all, because he wanted the upper levels to know he was coming, because he wanted to see who would run and who would stand. More guards tried. He stopped everything they threw at him, or redirected it, or in 2 cases simply stepped aside with a patience that seemed to unnerve them more than any display of force. An alarm firework burst overhead, painting the stone ceiling in red and white. Harry looked up at it briefly. At the outer gate, which was massive and iron-bound, and anchored with a 100-year-old ward, Harry stopped. He pressed both palms flat against the cold surface. He could feel the entire structure of the ward system, every anchor, every thread, every failsafe. It was genuinely impressive work. Whoever had built this had spent considerable time and talent on it. He unraveled it in about 40 seconds. The gate swung open on the sea wind, and the smell of it hit him, cold Atlantic air, salt and iodine, and the clean, indifferent wilderness of open water, and Harry stood in the gate of Azkaban prison and breathed it for a full 10 seconds with his eyes closed. How long has it been, Thanos said, since you stood in open air? Too long, Harry said. There were 12 Aurors on the outer platform, the emergency response team, deployed when the alarm triggered. They were in full battle gear, wands out, a containment formation that Harry recognized from the old DMLE tactical manuals. Their commander, a tall witch with close-cropped silver hair, stood at the point of the formation with her wand aimed directly at his chest. Harry recognized her, Commander Astrid Frome. He'd met her once, years ago, at a ministry function, back when he'd still been going to ministry functions. She was sharp and capable, and she had voted in the Wisengamot to have him imprisoned. He remembered that specifically because he'd looked up every vote, had spent weeks on it in his early months, memorizing them the way you memorize a debt. Potter, she said, her voice was rock steady. Stand down, comply with a return to custody, and this does not become... A what? Harry asked, genuinely curious. An incident, she finished. He looked at the 12 of them. He looked at the gray water behind them, and the transport boat docked at the jetty, and the horizon beyond it where the coast of Scotland was a dark gray line. He looked back at Frome. I'm going to leave now, Harry told her, with all the pleasantness of someone explaining a bus schedule. You're going to let that happen because the alternative is all 12 of you discovering quite quickly that your training didn't cover this particular situation. Frome's jaw tightened. She was running calculations. He could see it. That particular set of the face of someone who's weighing tactical options and not liking any of them. We have containment protocols for every threat classification. I'm not a threat classification, Harry said. I'm a man walking out of a prison that had no legal right to hold him, if you want to split hairs about it. She hit him with a stunner. It was a split-second decision, fast and professional, the kind of move you make before you let yourself think about it. The red beam was strong, the kind of concentrated, intent-focused casting that only comes from someone who's been doing this for 20 years. It hit Harry in the center of his chest. He felt the impact the way he'd felt the blasting curse upstairs, a tap, brief warmth, dispersal. He didn't even rock back on his heels. The 12 Aurors stared at him. Frome's wand arm dropped slightly. Not much. Enough. She is recalculating, Thanos observed. They all are. Here's what I'll do, Harry said, because Frome was still standing there with her arm half raised and she'd earned a straight answer. I won't hurt anyone on this platform. I won't destroy Azkaban. I have no particular interest in either. I'm walking out, and in the morning your commander will file an incident report, and the ministry will convene an emergency session, and they will all understand very quickly what has changed. That's not a threat. It's just how the next 12 hours are going to go." He stepped forward, the Aurors stepped back. Not as a formation, that would have been training. It was individual, instinctive, 12 people independently making the decision to create space between themselves and whatever Harry Potter had become. Frome held her ground, which he respected enormously, but she didn't cast again. Harry walked down the jetty, stepped into the transport boat, and pushed off from the dock. He didn't bother with the engine. He sat in the bow of the boat and felt the current and wind through the bottom of it, and reached out with his new understanding of things and directed both. And the boat moved across the dark water, toward Scotland, with a speed that should not have been physically possible from an 18-foot wooden vessel. Behind him, Azkaban sat gray and jagged in the sea. He didn't look back. "Tell me about this world," Thanos said, after they were well out onto open water and the island had become a shape behind them. "Your world, the magical part and the other part both. It's complicated," Harry said. "I have found that the universe is never as complicated as the beings inside it insist it is," Thanos said. "They mistake their emotional investment for complexity." Harry almost smiled at that. "How very Slytherin of you. I do not know what that means. Means you might fit in here after all." Harry watched the water move under the bow. "The short version, I live in a world where about 1 in 10,000 people are born with the ability to use magic. They hide from the rest, have done for centuries. Their world is built on blood hierarchies, political corruption, institutional cruelty, and a deep, constitutional terror of change dressed up as tradition." He paused. "About 4 years ago, I killed the most dangerous dark wizard of the last century and ended a war that had been grinding through the whole structure for decades. And then I went on trial for destroying some of the property. The victors imprisoned the weapon that won their war," Thanos said. "Not a question. The weapon got inconvenient," Harry said. "I started asking questions about who had been funding both sides. I started asking why certain pureblood families who'd been deeply embedded in Voldemort's inner circle had very clean records and very full Gringotts vaults after the war. I started asking who in the Wisengamot had signed orders they shouldn't have been able to sign." He looked at his hands again, at the familiar wand held loose between his fingers. "I was getting close to some people who could not afford to be gotten close to. So they found a different story for me, and the world believed it. The world was tired," Harry said, not bitterly, just as fact. 4 years of war and the prophet hammering fear into people every morning, and then suddenly it's over and everything is still rubble and someone has to be responsible for all of it, and there I was." He shrugged. "I'm almost impressive as a scapegoat. I'd basically been set up for it my entire life. Chosen one, undesirable number one, then this. The narrative writes itself." Thanos was quiet for a moment. "You said you were getting close to something before they moved against you. What were you close to?" "A group," Harry said. "I don't know the full shape of it yet. I called them the Conclave in my head because I didn't have a better name. Wizards ministry officials, a few names that didn't belong in any ministry record I'd ever seen. International names, Muggle names, some of them." He paused. "Which shouldn't have been possible, which is why I was still looking when they stopped me looking." Then Thanos said, "That is where we begin." "That's where I begin," Harry said mildly. "You're along for the ride." He felt that tectonic shift again, amusement, massive and ancient and slightly terrifying, as you say. The coast of Scotland came up out of the dark. Harry guided the boat into a natural cove south of the Portree headland, stepped out onto the rocks, and vanished the vessel with a thought. He stood on the coast with the wind coming off the sea and looked up at the sky, fully dark now, properly dark for the first time since he'd been sent to that island, stars coming through gaps in the cloud cover in handfuls and clusters. He hadn't seen stars in 2 years. He stood there for a long moment, head tilted back, not thinking about anything at all. Just the stars and the wind and the smell of heather somewhere behind him on the headland. "You loved this world once," Thanos observed. It was not a question or a challenge, just an observation from a consciousness that was very old and had learned to read living things the way Harry had once learned to read magical traces. "Yes," Harry said quietly. "Do you still?" Harry thought about the answer. He thought about Williamson and his crossword, and Commander Frome holding her ground on the jetty, and the people he could still remember clearly from before, faces and voices and particular laughs. He thought about the wizarding world with all its beauty and its cruelty and its spectacular talent for eating its own. "Ask me again when I'm done," he said. He turned from the sea and walked up into the darkness of the headland, and behind him, the waves kept coming in against the rocks, indifferent and endless and not remotely interested in any of it. Far above the island he'd just left, an owl was flying south with a letter in its talons. The letter would reach the ministry by morning. By then, Harry would already be in London. He didn't hurry. There was no need to hurry anymore. Chapter 2. The shape of ruin the Ministry of Magic had redecorated. Harry stood across the street from the telephone box entrance on a grey London morning, hands in the pockets of a coat he'd lifted from an unattended peg in a Portree pub the night before, and looked at the small bronze plaque they'd mounted beside the red paint. Department of Magical Affairs, Visitor Entrance. Clean font, very official, very reassuring. Kingsley's administration had spent a lot of energy on gestures like this one, making the machinery look friendly, polishing the outside of the cup. He crossed the street and stepped into the telephone box. The descent was the same. The recorded voice was new, a woman's voice now, warm and professional, welcoming visitors to the Ministry of Magic and asking them to state their name and purpose. Harry picked up the receiver. "Harry Potter," he said. "I'm here to resign." A beat of silence. The badge that slid out of the coin return read, "Harry Potter, purpose, unscheduled." He pinned it to his coat, stepped out into the atrium, and watched the moment ripple outward. It moved through the morning crowd the way a stone moves through still water. The witch at the security desk looked up from her newspaper and went very still. A pair of ministry clerks in the middle of an argument both turned at the same moment, drawn by something below conscious hearing, some instinctive reading of atmosphere that humans retained from older, more dangerous times. An auror near the far corridor who'd been looking the other way turned slowly, as though his body had decided before his mind did. Harry walked through it all at a steady pace. 47 people in this atrium, Thanos noted, reading them the way Harry might read a room for exits. 11 are armed. 4 of those 11 have already reached for their wands without drawing. The security desk which is triggering a silent alarm. You have approximately 4 minutes before the first response team arrives. "I know," Harry said quietly. He kept walking. "Let them come." He wasn't here for the atrium. He was here for the floor below it, the Department of Magical Law Enforcement, specifically the Records Division, specifically a set of sealed case files that had been sealed under a classification that should not have been available to a mid-level minister for legal affairs who had nonetheless managed to classify them. He'd found that thread 2 months before his arrest. He was pulling it now. The lift opened before he reached it. Not summoned, the attendant inside had seen him coming, and with a pragmatism Harry found genuinely admirable, had decided that whatever was happening this morning, his job description did not cover it. The cage stood open and empty. Harry stepped in, pressed the button for level 2, and watched the golden grill close. "You are enjoying this," Thanos observed. "A little," Harry admitted. "Good." Thanos sounded almost approving. A general who does not take any pleasure in his own movements is a general who will second-guess them. "I'm not a general. Not yet." The lift opened on level 2 to pandemonium. Someone had gotten word down here faster than the atrium crowd had managed. 3 aurors were already in the corridor in battle stance, wands leveled, another 2 visible through the glass partition of the main department office behind them. Someone had overturned a desk in what Harry suspected was meant to be a barricade. The bright yellow lettering on the wall, Magical Law Enforcement, had never looked more incongruous. The auror at the point of the formation, young, dark-haired, jaw set with the particular determination of someone who is terrified and refusing to let it show, said, "Potter, stop right there." Harry stopped, not because he was told to, because he recognized the young man. "Martinez," he said, "Robbie Martinez, you were 3 years below me at Hogwarts. Hufflepuff, you were brilliant at charms." Martinez's wand arm was entirely steady, which was impressive under the circumstances. "Sir, you are wanted for escape from lawful custody, and the custody wasn't lawful," Harry said pleasantly. "But let's not have that argument in a corridor. How's your mother? She had a bad winter, I remember you mentioning it." Something flickered across Martinez's face. The Hufflepuff in him, Harry suspected, that deep inconvenient decency that made genuine cruelty hard. She's fine, sir." "Good." Harry looked at the 5 of them evenly. "I'm going to the records room on sublevel 3. I will be there for approximately 20 minutes. I will not harm anyone, I will not destroy anything, and I will leave the same way I came. Anyone who wants to try to stop me in the next 20 minutes is making a choice I'd rather they didn't make." He met Martinez's eyes directly. "I'm asking, Robbie. Not ordering, not threatening. Asking. Give me 20 minutes. A pause that stretched past comfort and into something rower. Martinez lowered his wand by 2 inches. The other 4, reading their senior, did the same. Harry nodded once and walked down the corridor. Behind him, he heard someone start whispering rapidly into a communication mirror. He ignored it. The records room on sublevel 3 was behind 2 locked doors, one standard magical seal and one that required both a palm scan and a spoken password. Harry had the palm, and he had Thanos reading the magical frequency of the password, locked the way you'd read a musical note, and playing it back in perfect pitch. Both doors open. He stepped into a room that smelled of old parchment and dust, and the particular dry cold of climate-controlled magical storage, and he crossed to the section he needed with the certainty of someone who had been planning this specific walk for 2 years and 3 months. The files were there. 7 of them, thick folders bound in official red ribbon, sealed with a classification stamp that read Level 9, Ministerial Eyes Only. Harry pulled them all and sat on the floor between the shelves with his back against the cabinet and started reading. The files confirmed what he'd suspected and added things he hadn't known. The Conclave was older than Voldemort's last war. It had roots going back to the late 1970s, a quiet structure of aligned interests between old Ministry money, several of the larger pureblood dynasties, and this was the thing he hadn't known, the thing that changed the shape of everything, a Muggle intelligence body. Not British. The name in the files was redacted, replaced with a black box that Harry could see was about 7 letters long. An American agency, he suspected, based on the procedural language in the attached correspondence. They had been watching both sides of the last war, funding neither exactly, but influencing both, using Voldemort's insurrection to shake loose ministry power structures that had resisted their particular reforms, using the Order of the Phoenix as a check to ensure Voldemort never got organized enough to actually win cleanly, because a clean Death Eater victory would have given them nothing to work with. They needed a specific outcome, a wounded, grateful ministry that owed them something, presiding over a traumatized population that wouldn't ask too many questions. What they'd gotten instead was Harry, who'd ended the war too quickly and too publicly and then started poking at the seams. Harry, whose public profile made him simultaneously too visible to simply vanish and too dangerous to leave operational. Hence 17 counts of creative criminality and 15 years in a cell on a rock. He sat with that for a moment, the full picture of it, the sheer architectural scale of being managed. Then he photographed every page with a copying charm, folded the copies into his coat, resealed the files with the same frequency Thanos helped him read, and stood up. The Muggle agency, Thanos said, "You have a theory." "Several," Harry said, walking back toward the lift. "What I need is confirmation. And for that I need someone with access to international intelligence structures." He paused, "Which means I need to make myself visible enough that the right people start looking. You want to be found." "I want to choose who finds me," Harry said. "Different thing." He took the lift back up to the atrium. The response team had arrived in his absence, not the 4-minute estimate but closer to 9, which told him someone up the chain had hesitated before deploying, which was interesting. There were 12 Aurors now, plus Commander Frome herself, who had apparently come directly from Azkaban or been on the mainland already. She looked like she hadn't slept, which made sense, and she looked like she was furiously rethinking her entire morning, which also made sense. "Commander Frome," Harry said, stepping out of the lift. "Potter," her voice gave nothing away. "I'm going to need those files you took." "I didn't take any files," Harry said. "I read some files. They're back exactly where they belong." He held her gaze. "You should read them. Level 9, Sublevel 3, Section F. Make sure you're alone when you do." Frome stared at him. Something moved behind her eyes, quick, intelligent, calculating. She was good at her job. Harry thought she might actually be one of the people who could be useful, once she understood what she was actually working for. "I can't let you leave this building," she said. "You can't stop me leaving this building," Harry said gently. "Those aren't the same statement." He walked past the 12 Aurors, past the security desk where the witch had gone the color of old plaster, past the bronze plaque that said welcome in its careful, reassuring font, and stepped into the telephone box. The ascent took 30 seconds. He stepped out onto the London street into the gray morning. He walked 3 blocks north, turned into a coffee shop that was just opening, sat at a corner table, and ordered black coffee from a young man who was so staggeringly uninterested in Harry Potter that it was practically medicinal. He wrapped both hands around the mug and sat quietly while the city woke up around him. "You are waiting for something," Thanos said. "Someone," Harry said. He drank the coffee. It was terrible. It was wonderful. Give it about an hour. It took 43 minutes. The door of the coffee shop opened, and Hermione Granger walked in. She scanned the room from the doorway the way she always had, systematic left to right, missing nothing, and her eyes found him, and she stood there for a full 3 seconds without moving, which was very unlike her. And Harry noticed she was wearing a coat he didn't recognize, and her hair was shorter than he remembered, and there were lines at the corners of her eyes that hadn't been there before. She crossed the room, sat down across from him, set her bag on the chair beside her, and looked at him. He looked back. "You're out," she said. "Good morning to you too, Harry." Something crossed her face that was too complicated to name quickly. "You walked into the ministry. Needed some files. You walked into the ministry." She pressed both hands flat on the table as though grounding herself through the surface. 12 hours after breaking out of Azkaban, you walked in through the front entrance. "The telephone box entrance," Harry said. "Technically the front entrance is the Flu network." She stared at him. He watched her running through the full range of her feelings about that. He knew her well enough to read the sequence even after 2 years, even through everything, even now. Anger, relief, fear, anger again, something that was grief wearing a different coat, and then the thing she always landed on last, the thing that had been the most constant feature of Hermione Granger's entire existence, the need to understand. "How?" she asked. "The cell had 6 layers of containment. I know because she stopped. "Because you what?" Harry asked. She met his eyes. "Because I reviewed the specifications 2 years ago, when I was trying to find a legal argument for reopening the case." She held his gaze with the particular steadiness of someone who refuses to be ashamed of a truth. "I spent 14 months on it, Harry. I want you to know that." "I know you have no reason to." "I know," Harry said. She blinked. "I know you were working on it," he said. "I know you filed 3 separate appeals, 2 requests for evidence review, and a formal complaint with the Wisengamot Ethics Board. I know Galt had the last 2 appeals dismissed before they reached committee, and your complaint was buried by someone in clerical processing whose name you don't have yet, but I do." He watched her face. "You weren't at the trial because Galt's office sent you a false notification with the wrong date. You showed up the morning after." The color that left her face was remarkable. He watched her rebuild herself from it in real time, the brief crumple, the pressed lips, the spine straightening by degrees. "How do you know all of that?" "I had a lot of time," Harry said, "and I had a very good intelligence source." "What source?" Her eyes sharpened. "Harry, what happened in that cell? You walked through 12 Aurors and every containment ward in Azkaban and you feel different." She said the last part like she'd been trying not to say it. "You felt different the moment I walked in." "Something is different." Harry looked at her carefully. He'd thought about this moment. He'd thought about it in multiple versions on the boat from Azkaban, turning it over the way you turn a complicated problem. He owed her honesty. He also owed himself the reality of how she would receive it. "What do you know about the Infinity Stones?" he asked. The question landed on her face like a stone dropped in water. "The Muggle mythology, the Avengers and the not mythology," Harry said. "Real. A being called Thanos gathered all 6, destroyed half of all life in the universe with a snap of his fingers, and was subsequently defeated and killed." He watched her process. "Before he died, his soul fractured and scattered. 2 years ago, a piece of it found me in a cell on Azkaban Island." The coffee shop continued its early morning business around them. Someone ordered a flat white. The coffee machine hissed. Hermione was very still. "A piece of his soul." "Yes. Is it, are you?" She stopped, restarted, approached from a different angle because she was always better at the second approach. "Is it controlling you?" "No," Harry said. And then, because it was Hermione, "It's more of a conversation. He's in here," he touched his temple, "and I'm still here, and we have a generally productive working relationship. He has several thousand years of tactical knowledge and an understanding of universal power structures that makes the wizarding world look like a children's sandpit. I have local knowledge and a wand." He paused, "and I suppose something he found interesting enough to choose." She looked at him for a long moment. Is he listening right now?" "Yes," Thanos said, and Harry felt that enormous dark amusement again. "He says yes," Harry said. "Right." Hermione took a breath, then visibly decided to metabolize this the way she metabolized everything that exceeded her existing categories, by treating it as information to be understood rather than a catastrophe to be survived. "Okay, right. We'll come back to that." She reached into her bag and pulled out a file of her own, much thinner than the ministry files but covered in her handwriting in that familiar cramped hand. "Because there's something you need to see." "The conclave," Harry said. She stopped, looked up. "You already know. I was just at the ministry reading about them. What have you got?" She spread her papers on the table between them. It was different from what he'd found in the records room, more recent, more operational. She'd found financial records, personnel movements, property transfers. The picture she'd built was of the current conclave, not its history. 4 primary members she could identify by name. Networks of subsidiaries, properties in 6 countries. The name at the top, she said, tapping a photograph. "Aldrich Voss, former Unspeakable, left the ministry in 2001. He's been consulting for various private organizations since, none of them with any obvious connection to each other if you're not looking carefully." Harry picked up the photograph. A man in his 60s, lean, gray-templed, with the kind of face that made excellent first impressions and revealed nothing in the second or the third. He was photographed at a function of some kind. The background was too vague to place, deliberately vague, Harry suspected. He was at my trial, Harry said. Hermione frowned. I didn't see. He was in the gallery, back row, end seat left side. He was wearing a ministry visitor's pass. Harry set the photograph down. He watched the whole thing. Something moved across Hermione's face. Harry, did you know then or do you know now? Harry considered. Both, he said honestly. I noticed him, but I didn't have the name yet. I have it now. It's from the ministry files, and yours just confirmed it. He looked at the other papers she'd spread. What connects him to the Muggle intelligence body? How do you know about a Muggle intelligence body? Ministry files. The name is redacted, but it's about 7 letters, and the procedural language in the correspondence is American. Hermione reached into her bag again and pulled out a second sheaf. She was looking at him with an expression he recognized from their Hogwarts years, the one she wore when a problem she'd been working on for months suddenly crystallized. Satisfaction mixed with the particular anxiety of understanding something for the first time. SHIELD, she said. Strategic Homeland Intervention, Enforcement and Logistics Division. 7 letters. American, technically international, ostensibly a security organization, but with an operational scope that doesn't match any publicly acknowledged mandate. She laid a document on the table. Voss had correspondence with a SHIELD senior consultant in 2003, 2005, and twice in 2007. I found the paper trail through a property transfer in Dublin. Harry looked at the document. Read it. Set it down. Right, he said. SHIELD, Thanos said, and the word came with something attached to it, not a memory exactly, but an echo of recognition, vast and distant, the way something can register on your radar without being in visible range. The humans who build weapons and call it protection. I know of them. They have been watching much more than your wizarding world. What else do you know? Harry asked him, inside the conversation that was only his. Enough to find them useful, Thanos said, and enough to know they will move quickly once they understand what you are. Move how? The way all frightened, intelligent organizations move. They will try to contain you before they have to kill you, because killing you would create more questions than containing you, and they are very good at not creating questions. Harry looked at Hermione, who had been watching his face during this internal exchange with an expression that was working very hard at neutral. He says SHIELD will make a move soon, Harry told her. We should work quickly. When you say we, Hermione said carefully. I mean you and me, Harry said. Same as it always was, more or less. Something happened on her face then. Something that moved fast and was gone before it fully formed, but Harry saw it, had always been able to see her when she didn't mean to be seen, and it was not a simple thing. It was the expression of someone who has been carrying something heavy for a very long time and has just been unexpectedly offered the chance to set it down, and is not yet sure whether they trust the offer. You're not, she started, stopped, tried again. You're different, Harry. I don't mean the power, I mean you're cold. I'm clear, he said. There's an overlap. Yes, he acknowledged. There is. He looked at her steadily. I'm not what I was, Hermione, I know that. I'm not asking you to pretend otherwise. I'm asking if you can work with what I am now. She was quiet for a moment that was exactly the right length, not too quick, which would have been dishonest, not too long, which would have meant the answer was number. Then she gathered her papers, slid them back into her bag and picked up her tea. I found 4 conclave operational locations in Britain, she said. 2 in London, 1 in Edinburgh, 1 in a country estate in Wiltshire. She met his eyes over the rim of her cup. I've been sitting on this information for 6 weeks waiting for an opportunity. I suppose this is the opportunity. She is extraordinary, Thanos observed, and the note of genuine respect in it was unexpected enough that Harry registered it consciously. She really is, he said, and this time he didn't even bother making it internal. Hermione lowered her cup. Did you just say that to him? About you, Harry said. Yes. The expression that crossed her face was complicated and brief, and she smoothed it quickly with a practiced efficiency that meant she'd been smoothing feelings quickly for at least 2 years. Right, she said. Well, tell the ancient cosmic intelligence thank you. She opened her bag again and produced a piece of parchment on which she'd drawn a detailed map. The Wiltshire location is the most significant. It's a property registered to a shell corporation, but the ward signatures around it match unspeakable level classification. Voss is using unspeakable protocols on a private property, which is either extraordinarily arrogant or he has someone inside the DMLE still running active support for him. Both, Harry said. He had someone in clerical who buried your appeals. That's active support. Who? A man named Harwick, 3rd-level file administrator. He received 11 payments over 14 months from an account registered to one of Voss's shell corporations. The account is in the files I read this morning. Hermione stared at him. You got all that in 20 minutes in a records room. I had help reading faster, Harry said and tapped his temple. She let out a breath through her nose that was halfway to a laugh and halfway to something less comfortable. This is very strange, Harry. I know. The Wiltshire property, she pressed on because she was Hermione. You can't just walk in there the way you walked into the ministry. If Voss knows you're out, and he will know by now, he'll either have emptied the location or fortified it. I'm counting on fortified, Harry said. If he empties it, he takes his evidence with him. If he fortifies it, he leaves the evidence in place and puts guards on it, which means the evidence is still there when I go in. And the guards, Harry looked at her. Right, she said quietly. Different question. When? Tonight, Harry said. But first, he leaned back in his chair. Tell me about the last 2 years, not the legal work. How are you? The question surprised her. He saw it land, and for a moment she was just a person sitting across a table from her oldest friend, and the weight of 2 years of absence and fear and grief and work was right there in her face, undisguised, before she pulled it back. I'm fine, she said. Hermione. She stopped, looked at her hands. I'm better now than I was this morning, she said finally, and that was true in a way that the word fine hadn't been, and they both knew it. Harry nodded. He didn't push. He owed her the room to be complicated, the same room he'd asked her to give him. They sat in the coffee shop for another hour, working through her papers and cross-referencing them against what he'd read in the ministry. The young man who'd made Harry's terrible, wonderful coffee refilled it once without being asked. Outside the window, London moved in its enormous, indifferent way, buses and pedestrians and pigeons, and the distant pulse of a city that had no idea what was happening in a corner table of a coffee shop on a gray Thursday morning. Somewhere above all of it, in a satellite link that had been active since 3 in the morning, a series of anomalous magical energy readings off the coast of Scotland had triggered an alert protocol that crossed 3 intelligence agencies and landed on the desk of a man in New York who read it twice, set it down, and picked up a phone. Harry felt it distantly, not the specific action, but the shape of it, the way Thanos had taught him to read large structures from their vibrations. Something large turning its attention in his direction. Something organized and well-resourced and completely certain that it was on the right side of things. Shields looking, he said. Hermione looked up from her parchment. How soon? Harry considered the feeling, the weight and speed of the attention bearing down. Soon enough that we should do Wiltshire tonight rather than waiting. They are fast, Thanos confirmed, and they have resources your wizarding institutions do not. Satellites, electronic surveillance. The ability to deploy across this entire island within hours. A pause. They will also not fully understand what they are dealing with until it is too late for their initial deployment to be adequate. That is our window. What are they sending? Harry asked him. Scouts first, then assessors. Then when the assessors report back, something considerably more serious. Another pause, and this time the weight of it was almost amused. I have faced their kind before. Organizations built on the premise that sufficient preparation eliminates uncertainty. They have never met anything that could not be prepared for. Harry finished his coffee. He stood, shrugged on his coat, left a handful of Muggle coins on the table that were probably the wrong denomination but close enough. He held the door for Hermione. She stepped out onto the London street, tucked her bag under her arm and tilted her face up briefly into the gray morning, just for a second. Then she looked at him. Wiltshire tonight, she said. It was not a question. Wiltshire tonight, Harry confirmed. The city moved around them. Somewhere a phone was ringing in a Manhattan office, and a satellite was repositioning, and a helicarrier was being put on standby alert, and the entire vast machinery of global intelligence was beginning, slowly and with great confidence, to turn in their direction. Harry walked down the pavement with his hands in his pockets and felt none of it as a threat. He felt it the way he might feel weather coming, something to be factored in, to be used, to be moved through. They will come in force, Thanos said. Good, Harry said quietly, low enough that only Thanos heard it. I want them to see what they're dealing with before we have to explain it to them. Hermione glanced at him sideways. Are you talking to him? Always, Harry said. She considered that for half a block. Does he have opinions about me? He thinks you're extraordinary. He has good taste, she said, and the brief sharpness of it was so entirely her that Harry felt something move in his chest that was warmer than strategy and older than anger, something he recognized from before the world had processed him into something else. He didn't name it, but he didn't push it away either. They turned the corner and were gone into the city, and above them the gray sky gave nothing away. Chapter 3, Thunder and Iron. The Wiltshire estate had 12 wards and 43 rooms, and 4 conclave operatives posted at cardinal points around the grounds, which Harry knew because Thanos had read the entire magical and structural blueprint of the property from a quarter-mile out, while Harry and Hermione stood in a ditch beside a country lane, and ate sandwiches Hermione had produced from her bag, with the particular preparedness of someone who'd learned long ago that world-changing events happened on empty stomachs. Northwest Wardanker is the weakest, Harry said, chewing. The others are interlocked, but that one's running on a secondary stone. Someone did the renovation work cheaply. That's very Voss, Hermione said. She'd been inside 2 of his London properties already, she explained, doing reconnaissance in the weeks before Harry's escape. He spends where it shows and cuts corners on the infrastructure. The man has an aesthetic vanity problem. Useful, very. She folded the sandwich wrapper with precise corners and tucked it back in her bag. The operatives are any of them people you know. One of them was an Auror until 2003, Harry said, name of Carver. He quit after a disciplinary review. He paused. He was one of the ones who filed the initial complaint that started my investigation into the conclave, meaning he filed it deliberately to tip them off and they rewarded him with a private salary. Harry considered the figure pacing the northwest corner of the grounds. He always was a bad Auror. Too much sideways movement, not enough conviction. Hermione looked at him. How do you know he had too much sideways movement? Because he's doing it now. Harry nodded at the distant figure. See how he tracks. He's watching the lane, not the property. His threat model is external approach, not internal breach. He doesn't know we're already inside his perimeter. She looked. She saw it. We're not inside his perimeter yet. We are, Harry said. He'd stepped them across the outer ward boundary 7 minutes ago, using a technique Thanos had shown him that was less a counterspell than a conceptual argument with the ward's fundamental premise, finding the assumption the ward was built on, and gently demonstrating that the assumption was wrong. The ward believed that magical entities approaching from the south lane were the threat vector. It had not considered being argued out of its own logic. Hermione had watched him do it with an expression that was equal parts scientific fascination and deep personal discomfort, like watching someone pick a lock with their mind. Right, she said. We're inside his perimeter. She stood, brushed grass from her coat, and looked at the house. Georgian facade, 4 stories, dark windows, the kind of property that looked like old money from the lane and looked like a fortress the moment you understood what it was for. Voss isn't here. No, Harry agreed, but his records are. He started toward the house at an easy walk, not creeping, not rushing, just walking the way you walk toward something that belongs to you, the second-floor study. There's a ward lock on the door that runs off the same secondary stone as the northwest anchor. Once that anchor goes, the study lock drops too. You can feel all of that, can't you? She gave him a look. Harry, I am an excellent witch, but I cannot read the structural magical topology of a 43-room Georgian estate from a ditch. She is not wrong to be impressed, Thanos observed. He says you should be impressed, Harry said. I am impressed, Hermione said, with a tone that suggested being impressed was not the same as being comfortable. I'm walking through a field at night toward a conclave safe house because the soul of a dead cosmic warlord is doing architectural surveys from my best friend's skull. I'm extremely impressed and also slightly terrified. That's probably the correct response, Harry said. The northwest wardanker was a stone the size of a fist buried at the corner of the estate wall, invisible to ordinary magical detection, sitting in a hollow carved into the base of the wall itself with a concealment charm layered on top. Harry crouched beside the wall, pressed 2 fingers into the grass, and felt the stone below the soil like a heartbeat. He didn't pull it out. He didn't destroy it. He simply found the magical frequency it was running on, the particular note it sang in the spectrum of ward work, and changed one variable in it, the way you might change one note in a chord. The ward didn't collapse. It got confused. It started sending contradictory signals to its neighboring anchors, which started sending contradictory signals to theirs, and the entire northwest quadrant of the estate's security became briefly and thoroughly convinced that everything was fine in a way that no genuine security system should ever be. The operative at the northwest corner, Carver, stopped pacing, checked his wand, checked it again. His face, even at this distance, had the expression of a man whose instruments are telling him everything is normal and who doesn't trust them. 30 seconds, Harry said, and stood up and walked through the wall, not through the gap in the wall, through the wall. The stone parted for him the way water parts for a hand, not dramatically, not explosively, just recognizing that it had been asked to do something by something that had sufficient conviction to make it comply, and then closed again behind him. Hermione came through the gate 10 feet down, which she'd unlocked with a conventional alohomora while Harry was doing architectural violence, and gave him a look over it that he chose to interpret as affectionate. Inside the grounds, the house was quiet. The other 3 operatives were at their positions, 2 at the front, 1 at the back entrance, and the interior was dark except for a light on the ground floor east wing, which was probably a rest room. Harry and Hermione went in through a side window that Harry raised without touching it, stepping into what turned out to be a very formal sitting room full of furniture under dust sheets, and crossed through it to the stairs. The second-floor study door was already unlocked, exactly as predicted. Inside, in the light of Alumo's charm, they found 4 filing cabinets, a desk with a secured laptop, and a wall safe behind a painting of a moorland landscape that Harry had always thought was a cliché even in films. "Wall safe," Hermione said, pulling on a pair of gloves from her bag. "Combination is 14831, Harry said. She stopped. "How actually, I don't want to know." She turned the dial. The safe clicked open. Inside, 3 leather-bound ledgers and a collection of documents in both English and 2 other languages Harry didn't immediately recognize. "That's Afrikaans," Hermione said, lifting one page toward the wandlight. "And I think that's a SHIELD operational coding language. I've seen fragments of it before in the Dublin correspondence." "Take everything," Harry said. He was already at the filing cabinets, running his fingers along the fronts of them not to feel the handles but to feel the contents, reading the magical weight of what was inside the way you might taste the difference between 2 similar wines. 3 of these are administrative. The 4th one, he paused at the last cabinet, has something else in it. He opened it. Inside, in a folder at the back, behind what appeared to be insurance documentation for the property, was a collection of photographs. Surveillance photographs, high resolution, printed on what looked like commercial photo paper. Harry leafed through them. They were of him, every one of them. Spanning years, he was younger in the early ones, recognizably post-war, still wearing the slightly dazed look of someone who'd survived something enormous and hadn't quite processed it yet. They moved forward in time chronologically, and in each sequence he was doing something, testifying at a Weisengamot session, walking through Diagon Alley, attending a memorial service, meeting with a contact who he now understood was someone he'd been cultivating for his investigation without knowing they'd been already turned. The surveillance had been ongoing for years before his arrest. The last photograph in the sequence was taken through the window of his flat in London. He was sitting at his kitchen table reading case notes. The date stamp in the corner was 3 days before his arrest. He looked at it for a long moment. They were always watching, Thanos said, and there was something in it that was not sympathy exactly, but was the understanding of someone who had also been studied by those who meant to use or destroy him. This is what institutions do to things they cannot classify. They observe until they find the moment to act. Harry set the photograph down. "Copy all of this," he told Hermione, who was already doing it, producing a precise and rapid copying charm that laid clean duplicates of every page on the desk beside her as she worked. "Then put it back exactly." She looked up. "We're leaving everything. We're leaving it exactly as we found it," Harry said. "I don't want Voss to know what we have. I want him to keep his operational structure intact right up until the moment I decide otherwise." Something in her expression shifted, the recognition of a strategic patience that was different in quality from anything she'd seen in him before. Not Harry, who was brave and a bit reckless. Something cooler and more architectural. "That's him," she said. "That's Thanos. That's his thinking." "It's mine too now," Harry said. "We've been in the same head for a while." She looked at him for a moment, and whatever she was going to say was interrupted by a sound from downstairs. The back entrance operative had apparently decided to do a sweep of the interior, which was either unusually diligent or something had made him nervous. Footsteps on the ground floor, moving toward the stairs. Harry and Hermione were out of the study, down the corridor, and through a window at the end of the hall before the footsteps reached the second floor. He dropped 12 feet to the ground below and landed without a sound. Hermione came down a second later in a controlled descent she managed with more grace than the distance deserved. They were across the grounds and through the gate and back into the lane before the operative completed his sweep and found the study undisturbed. They walked half a mile down the country lane before Hermione said, "We got everything. Everything that was there," Harry said. "The laptop too, I copied the drive." He'd done it by touching the closed lid, which felt absurd even saying it internally, but Thanos had explained the principle and it had worked. "You copied a laptop hard drive by touching it." "Yes." "Where?" "My memory," Harry said. "I can reconstruct it later." Hermione pulled her coat tighter and looked up at the sky for a moment. "Clear tonight, properly clear, the stars doing their thing above the Wiltshire fields." "Harry," she said, When this is over, whatever this ends up being, what happens to you? After. Ask me when we're after. I'm asking now. He looked at the stars too briefly. I don't know, he said honestly, but I know it looks different from what it used to look like. I know I'm not going back to a version of this where I'm waiting for the world to decide whether I'm useful or dangerous. She was quiet for a moment. And what version are you going toward? Before he could answer, the sky to the north lit up. Not dawn, it was 2 a.m, nowhere near dawn. This was white gold and moving, traveling fast across the cloud cover from the northeast, and it carried with it a deep subsonic pressure that Harry felt in his chest before he heard it with his ears. That's a helicarrier, Hermione said, and the fact that she recognized it, knew what a helicarrier looked like in motion, at night, at distance, told Harry that she'd done considerably more SHIELD research than the Dublin documents suggested. 3 of them, Harry said, feeling their weight through the sky. Not looking through his eyes but through something wider, the expanded perception that had become natural over the last 48 hours. And they've brought something else. He felt it a moment before he heard the crack. The lightning came down out of a clear sky, which should not have been possible but was, striking the field 20 yards ahead of them with a concussion that threw soil in a wide arc. When the light cleared, a man stood in the scorched grass, tall. Broad in a way that suggested the word broad was not doing adequate work. Long red cape, silver armor, a hammer hanging from his hand with an ease that made the hammer's obvious weight a kind of joke. He looked at Harry across the 20 yards of field with eyes that were blue and very old. You carry a familiar resonance, Thor Odinson said. His voice was deep and carrying even at normal volume. He made no move to raise the hammer. I have felt it before, the weight of the stones. The stones are destroyed, Harry said. Their power is not, Thor said. Power does not die when its vessel does, it finds a new one. His eyes were sharp, reading Harry with the same directness that very old things use when they don't see the point of pretending. It found you, found me, Harry agreed, and stayed. Thor nodded slowly, as though this confirmed something rather than surprised him. He looked at Hermione briefly, assessing, not dismissive, and then back to Harry. My friends are watching, he said. From above, they are. He paused in the particular way of someone choosing their words from a second language even though they'd been fluent in it for years, less inclined toward conversation than I am. How much less? Harry asked. The 3 helicarriers had stopped moving overhead. Holding position, which meant sensors, which meant they'd been painted by targeting systems in the last 30 seconds. Harry felt it the same way he'd felt the wards, as a kind of attention, structured and purposeful, pressing down from above. They have weapons capable of significant area destruction, Thanos said, with the tone of someone consulting an internal encyclopedia. But they will not use them while Odinson is in the engagement zone. They value their own. They won't fire, Harry told Hermione quietly. Thor's in the way. I'm aware, she murmured back, and he noticed she hadn't drawn her wand. Smart. Wands meant escalation. Thor heard this exchange. His hearing was apparently excellent, and something shifted in his expression. Not threat, something more like evaluation. You are not frightened, he said to Harry. Not accusatory, observational. Should I be? Most would be, Thor said simply. 3 helicarriers, the full attention of S.H.I.E.L.D., and a conversation with the god of thunder in a field at 2 a.m. Most beings, even powerful ones, would be at least somewhat concerned. The helicarriers won't fire, Harry said. You won't swing the hammer at someone standing still having a conversation. And S.H.I.E.L.D. doesn't know what I am yet, which means they're in an assess and contain mode rather than a terminate and report mode. He looked at Thor with the same directness. You came down for the conversation, so let's have it. Thor studied him for a moment. Then he did something unexpected. He set the hammer on the ground beside him and straightened up, empty-handed, and Harry understood this was a gesture of considerable deliberateness from a man who never put his hammer down. Thanos killed my people, he said. He killed half of everything. I felt the stone's power rearrange the universe. The blue eyes were steady. The soul that is inside you, I will not pretend that does not concern me. It should concern you less than the alternative, Harry said. Thanos, dead and scattered, was looking for the most destructive vessel he could find. He found me instead. And why should that reassure me? It doesn't, Harry said. Yet, he looked at Thor evenly. I'm not here to conquer anything. I'm here to dismantle a specific structure of people who have spent decades manipulating 2 separate worlds for their own interests. When that's done, you can reassess. And if I were to try to stop you now? Thor asked, and there was no threat in it, just a genuine question, the kind that a warrior asks when they're taking the measure of someone. Harry considered it honestly. I'd prefer you didn't, he said. Not because I couldn't handle it, because it would be a waste of both our time and I'd be annoyed. A moment of silence over the dark field. Then Thor laughed. It was a full, unguarded, genuine laugh, the kind that filled the space around it, and it transformed his face briefly into something much younger. Spoken like someone who has spoken to Thanos long enough to absorb his particular brand of bluntness, he said. He picked the hammer back up. I will not stop you tonight, but we will speak again, you and I, looking forward to it, Harry said, and meant it. Above them, the helicarriers had not moved. But from the nearest one, a signal was being sent. Harry felt it as a decision made, the weight of it, and 6 seconds later a support strut extended from its hull, and a man in a red and gold suit of armor that had a very distinct energy signature stepped off it and began to descend. Hermione made a small sound. Oh, she said, he's coming down himself. Tony Stark, Thanos said, and the recognition that came with the name was enormous and complex and threaded through with something that might, in a different voice from a different source, have been called respect. He is the one who finished it. The snap that unmade me. A pause. He died doing it. I know, Harry said quietly. He came back, did he? Apparently. Then he is, Thanos said, slowly, more formidable than I credited. Tony Stark hit the ground 6 feet away with a thud that the suit absorbed, and he didn't seem to notice. He flipped the faceplate up and looked at Harry with brown eyes that were sharp and permanently calculating, and the look he gave Harry was the look of an engineer confronting a mechanism he didn't build and doesn't fully understand, and is absolutely going to understand before this is over. So, Tony said, you're the magical British fugitive with infinity soul readings that are making every sensor I have absolutely lose its mind. He glanced at Hermione. And you brought a friend. Nice, Tony Stark, Harry said. Harry Potter. Tony said it back with an exact replica of Harry's tone, testing it. You know, I did my reading on the flight over. You killed a Dark Lord at 17, then you killed another one at 22, then you got arrested for property damage. He tilted his head. The property damage charge is the part that tells me everything I need to know about your system. Then you understand why I'm not in it anymore, Harry said. What I understand, Tony said, and the easy conversational tone didn't entirely conceal the precision running underneath it, is that you're walking around with the soul of the most dangerous being in the recorded history of the universe inside you, and you've already broken out of a prison, walked into a government building, and are currently standing in a field in Wiltshire having done something to a conclave safe house that my sensor arrays can't quite read. He paused. I'm trying to decide if that's a threat or a job application. Neither, Harry said. Everything is one of those two things eventually, Tony said. Stark, Thor put a hand on Tony's shoulder briefly. A grounding gesture. Tony registered it without looking back. He is not an enemy tonight. I'm aware, Tony said, not looking away from Harry. I'm also aware that tonight is doing a lot of heavy lifting in that sentence. He studied Harry with the particular focus of someone who is simultaneously running diagnostic analysis and having a conversation. The infinity resonance in you, Friday's reading it as fragmented but coherent. One soul fragment, partially integrated with the host's existing magical framework. The host's magical output is, he glanced at a readout on his gauntlet, off every scale I have, and I built these scales specifically for off-scale things. Does your suit come with a volume control? Harry asked. Because the sensor readings are buzzing slightly and it's mildly irritating. Tony blinked. You can feel my sensors. You're using a pulsed microwave scan on a 40 GHz band, Harry said, which was information Thanos had supplied approximately 3 seconds ago, and which Harry had no idea how to verify but which was clearly correct based on Tony's expression. It's not uncomfortable, just noticeable, like a fly. A pause. Friday, Tony said to the air. Already adjusted, boss. The suit replied from somewhere around its collar. The buzzing stopped. Harry nodded. Thank you. Tony looked at him for a long moment. Something in the engineering expression had shifted into something more complicated. What do you want? He asked. Not hostile, genuinely asking. Right now, Harry said, for you to understand that I'm not your problem. I'm working on a specific issue with a specific organization, and S.H.I.E.L.D.'s connection to that organization is something you're going to want to look into before you decide where you stand. Tony's eyes narrowed. S.H.I.E.L.D.'s connection to Aldrich Voss, Hermione said, from beside Harry, and the name hit Tony's face in a way that was extremely informative. A very slight, very controlled reaction, the expression of someone who has heard a name before and has decided what to do about hearing it again before the hearing finished. You know the name, Harry said. I know a lot of names, Tony said carefully. Then you know more than you're currently sharing about the Conclave's operational relationship with S.H.I.E.L.D., Harry said. Which means either S.H.I.E.L.D. hasn't told you the full picture, which is concerning, or you've known the full picture for a while and haven't acted on it, which is more concerning. He tilted his head. Either way, it means we have more common ground than 3 helicarriers in hover mode would suggest. Tony was very still. Then slowly he closed the gap between them by 2 steps, dropping his voice below what the helicarrier systems could clearly pick up at this distance. The VOS connection has been flagged internally, he said, quietly and precisely. I've been pushing for a full audit of certain SHIELD Conclave-adjacent financial channels for 8 months. I keep getting stonewalled. His jaw was tight. And now someone with infinity power levels is pointing at the same thing I've been pointing at, which is either a very convenient coincidence or something I'm going to have to think about very carefully. Think fast, Harry said. I'm moving on VOS directly within the next few days, and when I do it's going to make what happened at Azkaban look like a noise complaint. Tony looked at him for another long moment. The calculating eyes were still running, always running, but underneath them something had shifted, not trust. The precursor to trust maybe. The acknowledgement that the variables were more complex than the initial assessment had accounted for. I'm going to need to loop in Fury, Tony said. No, Harry said. He's going to find out anyway. When I'm ready, Harry said, not aggressively, just as fact. Fury's position on entities with infinity-level power is terminate first, which is documented and reasonable, but it's not useful to me right now. When I've finished with Voss and the Conclave, I'll sit down with Fury and have whatever conversation he needs to have, but not before. Tony studied him. And if I disagree with that timeline, you can disagree with it, Harry said. Disagreeing doesn't move the helicarriers. From above, a voice crackled through Tony's suit speakers, Fury's voice, tight and controlled and clearly having the worst morning of a very long career in worst mornings. Stark, status. Tony kept his eyes on Harry. Still talking, he said. We're reading an M-class magical event at the safe house, Fury said. What happened there? Sightseeing, Harry said, loudly enough for the speakers to pick it up. A pause from the helicarrier. Then, is that Potter? Good morning, Director, Harry said. Another pause, longer this time. Stark, get back up here. In a minute, Tony said. Stark, in a minute, Nick. Tony closed the comm line with a gesture that suggested this was not the first time he'd done that in a field in the middle of the night. He looked at Harry. He's going to keep me up all night about this. Probably, Harry agreed. The Conclave, Tony said. You have documentation. Comprehensive, Harry said. This is done. When this is done, Harry said, you'll have everything. I have no interest in protecting any of it. The entire structure should come down in the light. Tony looked at him for one more long moment. Then he looked at Hermione. Are you the voice of reason in this partnership? I'm the voice of context, Hermione said. The voice of reason has largely been sidelined by events. Tony almost smiled. It was a small thing, very quick, but it was real. I like her, he said to Harry. Everyone does, Harry said. Tony stepped back. The faceplate came down. Thor, he said, and his voice was back in full armor mode, carrying across the field. We're going. Thor looked at Harry across the dark grass one last time. The next conversation, he said, will not be in a field at night. I would prefer somewhere with seating. I'll bring coffee, Harry said. Thor gave a short nod that managed to be simultaneously solemn and pleased, and then he rose, simply rose, with the hammer pulling him upward, and was gone into the dark sky with a speed that still managed to look serene. Tony Stark rocketed up after him a second later in a streak of gold and red. The 3 helicarriers held their positions for 30 more seconds. Then one by one they turned and moved northeast, and their running lights became indistinguishable from the stars, and then they were gone. Silence settled back over the Wiltshire field. Crickets, wind, the distant bark of a dog from the direction of the lane. Hermione let out a breath. Right, she said. That happened. That happened, Harry agreed. Tony Stark thinks I'm reasonable. He said you were the voice of context. That's the same thing from Tony Stark, I imagine. She looked at the sky where the helicarriers had been. He knows more than he told you. A lot more, Harry agreed. He's been working the same problem from the inside that we're working from the outside. Which is useful. He started walking back down the lane. And it means when Voss moves, and he will move, because by morning he's going to know we were at the estate. There are people inside S.H.I.E.L.D. who will be watching it from our side. Hermione fell into step beside him. You trust Stark, Harry thought about it. About the brown eyes doing their calculations, about the deliberateness of lowering his voice below the helicarrier's range, about the 8 months of stonewalled internal audits that matched exactly the period Hermione had been having her appeals buried. Not yet, Harry said, but I think we want the same things, mostly. What about Thor? Harry considered the image of Thor setting his hammer on the ground. Him I trust, he said simply. Anyone who puts down their weapon to have a conversation in good faith gets a reasonable amount of trust from me. They walked. The lane curved south, stars overhead. Harry, Hermione said after a while. Yes, the photographs in the safe house, she said carefully. The one through your kitchen window. Yes, they were watching you for years before the arrest. Yes. Which means, she paused, working through it the way she worked through everything, feeling the logical structure of it. Which means everything you were building toward, the investigation, the contacts you thought you were cultivating, they knew. They knew the whole time and they were managing it. Yes, Harry said. That doesn't, she stopped again. That doesn't make you angry. It makes me informed, Harry said. Angry is what they wanted. Angry is what they planned for. An angry Harry Potter is manageable. He charges in, makes mistakes, creates grounds for prosecution. He looked at her. I had 2 years to stop being angry. She was quiet for a moment. The lane was dark and the fields stretched away on either side, and the country was enormous and dark and quiet around them. And now, she asked. Harry thought about the photographs, about Voss in the gallery at his trial, about the comfortable architecture of it, how neatly he'd been fitted into the space they'd designed for him. Now, he said, I'm building something they didn't plan for. Hermione nodded slowly. She didn't ask what that was. She understood, in the way she'd always understood things before they were fully spoken, that the answer was visible in the way he moved, the way he thought, the way he'd walked through 12 Aurors and 3 helicarriers, and Thor Odinson in a field, and come out the other side without running. The thing they hadn't planned for was a Harry Potter who wasn't afraid of any of it. She reached into her bag and produced 2 more sandwiches, held one out to him. He took it. They walked south through the Wiltshire night, and somewhere above them the satellites were still watching, and somewhere in London, a grey-templed man was being told that his safe house had been visited by a ghost and had left no trace. And somewhere in Manhattan, a man in an iron suit was staring at sensor readings that exceeded every parameter he'd built and thinking very carefully about what kind of problem this actually was. Harry ate his sandwich and thought about Voss and about the shape of the thing he was building and didn't hurry any of it. Chapter 4, Sport. 3 days after Wiltshire, the first piece of Voss's network broke. It didn't break because Harry forced it. It broke because Harry had spent those 3 days doing something Thanos described as surgical pressure at load-bearing points, and Harry described as finding the thing a structure was most afraid of losing and making it aware that he knew where that thing was. The thing Voss's London financial network was most afraid of losing was a man named Gregor Pell. Pell was a squib born to a wizarding family, no magic of his own, which had apparently made him vicious in the particular way of someone who grew up adjacent to power and was never allowed to hold it. He'd spent 30 years becoming indispensable to people who had magic instead, threading himself through the financial architecture of the wizarding world's grey economy until he knew where every nut was buried. Voss used him to move money between the Conclave's magical and muggle accounts in ways that left no obvious trace. Harry found Pell in a Clerkenwell coffee shop on a Tuesday morning, reading the Financial Times and eating a croissant with the unhurried ease of a man who feels entirely safe. He sat down across from him. Pell looked up. His face went through several things in rapid succession: recognition, confusion, recalculation, and then a very careful neutral that told Harry he was good under pressure. Mr. Potter, he said, you're supposed to be in Azkaban. I got out, Harry said. The croissant looks good. It is good. Pell set down his newspaper with the controlled deliberateness of someone who is deciding how a conversation is going to go. He was in his mid-50s, compact, gray at the temples, with the watchful economy of movement that came from spending decades in rooms where the people around you could do things to you that you couldn't do back. I assume you're not here for the pastries. I'm here because you're unhappy, Harry said. Pell's eyes narrowed. AMI, you've been moving Voss's money for 11 years, Harry said, and in that time you've been compensated adequately but not well, given what you actually provide. You know the full architecture of his financial network, every account, every shell, every transfer. You know where the money goes and where it comes from. That makes you the single most valuable operational asset in the entire Conclave structure. Harry looked at him evenly, and he pays you like a bookkeeper. Something shifted in Pell's expression, very slight. The particular adjustment of a man who is recalibrating how much another person understands. You know what the difference is between being indispensable and being safe, Harry continued. Nothing. They feel the same from inside, but from outside they look completely different. Indispensable means you know too much to be discarded carelessly. It does not mean you're protected. It means you're a liability that's being carefully managed. Pell looked at his croissant. Voss knows that the moment you decide his interests and yours have diverged, Harry said, you become his biggest problem. He has a plan for that. He's had it for years. Do you want to know what it is? A pause. You don't know what it is, Pell said. Harry described it. He described it in detail, the specific account that had been established in Pell's name without his knowledge, the 2 property transactions that had been structured to look like Pell had been skimming, the sealed testimony from a compromised Wisengamot member that was sitting in a vault waiting to be deployed. It was all in the ministry files and the Wiltshire safe house documents, assembled by Hermione over the previous 3 days into a picture that was precise and complete. Pell's face, by the end, was the face of a man watching a door he'd believed was a wall swing open. What do you want? He asked. Everything, Harry said. Account numbers, transfer histories, the identity of Voss's current operational contacts inside the ministry, and the name of his shield handler. He paused. In exchange, the documentation of your manufactured liability disappears, and I have no interest in what you've done for Voss over 11 years. Pell was quiet for a long moment. He took a bite of his croissant. He chewed it thoughtfully. The shield handler, he said. That name is worth more than the rest combined. Then it's very lucky, Harry said, that what I'm offering is worth considerably more than what Voss is giving you. Pell looked at him across the table with the eyes of a man who had spent 30 years reading rooms and people and the precise weight of offers. He was looking for the trap. Harry let him look. There was no trap. Harry had no use for Gregor Pell beyond this morning. He wasn't building a network of informants. He wasn't establishing leverage for later. He needed this information now, quickly, and then Pell could go back to his croissants and his Financial Times and his carefully constructed life, or he could find a different life, either way. Arnaud Bellevoire, Pell said finally. He's not publicly associated with S.H.I.E.L.D. He works through a Paris-based consultancy called Meridian Strategic. But his actual reporting chain goes directly to a deputy director named Morales, Valentina Morales. He reached into his jacket and produced a small notebook, the old-fashioned kind, leather-bound, personal. He tore out a page, wrote 3 sets of numbers on it. Those are the 3 primary transfer accounts. The middle one is where Voss's operational budget for the current quarter sits, about 4 million between Muggle sterling and galleon equivalent. Harry took the page. Thank you. Don't thank me, Pell said. He picked up his newspaper. I've been waiting for something like you for a long time, Mr. Potter. I just didn't know what shape it would be. Harry left him to his croissant. Clean, Thanos observed, as Harry walked back out into the Clerkenwell morning. No coercion, no threats he didn't already believe. The best leverage is the truth, Harry said. He already knew all of it somewhere. I just showed him I knew it too. You are learning, Thanos said, and there was something in it that wasn't condescension. It was the tone of someone who has taught before and recognizes the particular satisfaction of watching a student exceed the lesson. Hermione was waiting in a bookshop 3 streets away, surrounded by texts on international magical law and a cup of tea she'd acquired from somewhere, sitting cross-legged on a floor cushion with the absorption of someone who has found their natural habitat. Harry dropped the page with the account numbers onto the open book in her lap. She picked it up, read it, and looked at him. Bellevoire, she said. You know the name. It came up in the Dublin correspondence, peripheral. I thought he was administrative. She was already reaching for her bag. Meridian Strategic. I can pull their company registration and trace the ownership chain within a few hours. Valentina Morales, Harry said. S.H.I.E.L.D. Deputy Director. Hermione paused. Tony Stark will know her. Yes, Harry said, which is why we're not going to him with it yet. He sat down in the adjacent chair. The moment we bring Morales's name to Stark, it becomes a S.H.I.E.L.D. internal matter, which means it gets complicated in ways that take the operational control away from us. I want the full picture first. She looked at him steadily. At what point do you share the picture? When sharing it does more damage to Voss than keeping it does. That's a Thanos answer, she said. It's a correct answer, Harry said. She held his gaze for a moment, then went back to her bag. There's something else, she said, pulling out a folded newspaper, the Daily Prophet, the morning edition. She handed it to him. The front page headline read, Potter terrorizes ministry. AURORS powerless as convicted dark wizard WALKS free. Below it, a photograph of the atrium taken about 20 minutes after Harry had left, showing the 12 Aurors who'd arrived and the general atmosphere of institutional shock. And below that, a smaller headline, Ministry Emergency Session calls for international response. SOURCES say Avengers involvement being considered. Harry read the article. It was comprehensively wrong about almost everything. He had not threatened anyone. He had not destroyed anything. And the characterization of him as a convicted dark wizard was doing the work that Galt's prosecution had been designed to do, providing a narrative scaffolding that made the reader's fear feel retrospectively justified. What interested him was not the article but the sourcing. 3 named ministry officials, all quoted with specific claims about his behavior in the atrium. 2 of those officials, according to Hermione's files, had direct conclave connections. Voss was managing the story. Moving fast, which meant Voss was frightened, which meant Wiltshire had been noticed in some way Harry hadn't fully accounted for. He knows we were there, Hermione said, watching Harry's face. He suspects, Harry said. He doesn't know what we took. If he knew we had the Wiltshire documents, he'd be burning the rest of the network, not running a press campaign. He folded the paper. The press campaign means he's still trying to contain this with public perception. He wants the ministry to pursue me aggressively enough that I'm occupied defending myself. And instead I'm in a bookshop in Clerkenwell, Harry said, completely unbothered. He is also moving assets, Thanos said. Harry felt it as a kind of distant vibration, not a specific location but a general movement, the way you can sometimes feel a weather system shifting before you can see it. The magical signatures that connect to the conclave network have been active since this morning. Several nodes in the structure are repositioning. He's consolidating, Harry told Hermione, pulling the network inward. Securing the most important assets and cutting loose the peripheral ones, which means he's going to focus everything around the core, she said, which means the core is where everything we need is going to be. Harry leaned back in his chair. Find me Voss's primary location, not the estates, not the London offices, his actual base of operations, the place he goes when he's frightened. Hermione was already writing in her notebook. I have 3 candidates from the financial records. I'll narrow it down. He let her work and sat with the newspaper in his hands and thought about Voss, about the shape of a man who had spent decades building something and was now watching it being mapped from the outside. Harry understood something about that kind of intelligence. It was precise, but it was also brittle. People who built elaborate structures were often better at architecture than they were at chaos. Voss had spent 30 years designing systems. He'd never had to improvise. Harry was going to give him something to improvise about. The second piece of the network broke on Wednesday evening, and this one Harry did not handle gently. The conclave operative inside the ministry, the man named Harwick who had buried Hermione's appeals, received a visitor at his flat in Bethnal Green at 7:30. Harry came through the door without knocking, which Harwick noticed, and without any visible means of entry, which Harwick found considerably more alarming. Harwick was a thin man in his 40s who had the bureaucratic camouflage of someone who had spent a career being entirely forgettable. He was in the middle of dinner. He rose from his chair and reached for the wand on the table beside his plate with a speed that wasn't bad for a file administrator. Harry had the wand before Harwick's hand closed on it. It sailed to him across the kitchen with a gentle inevitability, and he held it loosely. "Mr. Harwick," he said, "I want to talk to you about some document processing decisions you made over the last 14 months. Harwick's throat moved. He had very pale eyes that were currently doing rapid calculations behind their paleness, running through options and rejecting them. "I don't know what, you buried 3 appeals filed by Hermione Granger on my behalf," Harry said. "You received payment for doing so from an account registered to a company called Brentfield Consulting Limited, which is one of 9 shell companies operated by Aldrich Voss's network." He set Harwick's wand on the kitchen counter, out of reach, and sat down in the chair opposite Harwick's dinner. "The payment schedule is documented. The processing decisions are documented. The communication between you and the account manager at Brentfield is documented." He looked at Harwick steadily. "You worked very hard to make sure I stayed in that cell. I want to know why. Not how much you were paid, I have that. Why?" Something in Harwick's expression was working very hard at defiance and not quite getting there. "I'm a civil servant," he said. "I follow." "Don't," Harry said quietly, not loudly, not threateningly, just a simple word of genuine warning, the kind that carries weight because it isn't trying to carry weight. Harwick stopped. "I sat in a cell for 2 years and 3 months, Harry said. "I know what it cost. I know what it cost me, and I know what it cost the people who were trying to help me." "You're not a soldier following orders. You're a man who took money to make sure the paperwork disappeared." He leaned forward. "So I'll ask again, why not the money? The reason you could look at a stack of legal appeals and bury them." A long silence. Harwick's dinner was getting cold. "They told me you were dangerous," Harwick said finally, and the defiance was entirely gone now, leaving something smaller and less comfortable. "Before the appeals even came in. Voss, I'd worked with his consultancy for years, small things, nothing like this, but he came to me directly in person, and he said that keeping Potter contained was a matter of international security. That there were things you knew that couldn't come out, that the appeals needed to not reach committee." He looked at his hands. He said you were a dark wizard, that the trial had been lenient. And you believed that? I wanted to, Harwick said, and that was honest enough that Harry sat with it for a moment. He is not Voss, Thanos said. He is not even a true part of the structure. He is a door that was opened by fear and convenience. Harry looked at Harwick. Harwick looked at his dinner. Here's what you're going to do, Harry said. You're going to write a full account of every instruction you received from Voss's network, every payment, every document you processed or suppressed, and every communication you had with anyone connected to Brentfield or any of its associated entities. All of it dated, specific, signed. You're going to give that account to Commander Astrid Frome at the DMLE, with a copy kept by Hermione Granger. He stood up. And then you're going to resign and take the very generous offer your brother-in-law made you last year to go work for his firm in Edinburgh. Harwick stared at him. How do you know about my? You have 2 weeks, Harry said. After that, the documentation I have goes to Frome regardless, and you're part of a criminal conspiracy case rather than a witness in one. He picked up his coat from where he'd draped it over the back of the chair. Your dinner's getting cold. He left. On the street outside, walking back toward the tube station with his hands in his pockets, he felt Thanos turn something over with the particular weight of a considered thought. You gave him a way out. He's not the problem, Harry said. He's the symptom. You could have used him as leverage against Voss directly. He would have made a useful instrument. I don't want instruments, Harry said. I want the structure to come down. Instruments complicate that. He stopped at the tube entrance, looked at the evening sky above the street. And I want people to make their own choices where possible, even if those choices are late. Thanos was quiet for a moment. You are not what I expected. What did you expect? Rage, Thanos said simply. Shaped into purpose but essentially reactive. What you are is something I have rarely encountered. A pause. You are cold without being cruel. The two usually travel together in someone who has been through what you have been through. Cruelty is inefficient, Harry said. You taught me that, sort of. I taught you the strategic version of it, Thanos said. What you have is something else, something older than strategy. Harry went down into the tube and didn't think about what older than strategy meant until he was halfway back to the flat Hermione had arranged for them in Islington, sitting in a rattling carriage with the evening crowd shifting around him. And then he thought about it for exactly one stop before he set it down and thought about Voss instead. Hermione had the primary location by Thursday morning. She traced it through the financial records, Pell's account numbers cross-referenced with property taxes in the Paris administrative district, which cross-referenced with a company registration that connected back to Bellevoire, which connected to a physical address in the 8th arrondissement. A private building behind a formal garden, registered as a cultural foundation, hosting no public events, staffed by what the administrative filings described as research personnel. Voss has been using Paris as his base for at least 4 years, Hermione said, spreading her papers on the kitchen table of the Islington flat with the practiced efficiency of someone who had been building cases for months and was deeply relieved to finally be building them toward something. Bellevoire operates from there. Morales visits twice a year. I found the hotel bookings in the account records. They use the same hotel on the same street both times. She looked up. If Voss is consolidating, he's going to Paris. He's going to pull everything into the one location he trusts most. When? The financial movements Thanos flagged yesterday morning, 3 transfers all going toward accounts connected to the Paris building. He's moving money home. She tapped the location on her rough map. I'd say he's already there or will be within 24 hours. Harry looked at the map, at the address, at the shape of it. Then he looked at Hermione. I want to show you something. He held out his hand, and without quite deciding to do it in any deliberate way, he let what he normally kept at a kind of quiet hum come fully present. The merged power, the full reach of what Thanos and his own magic had become together. It was visible barely as a faint violet at the edges of his hands and forearms, the signature of infinity resonance running through a magical framework. The temperature in the kitchen dropped 2 degrees. Hermione looked at his hands, then up at his face. That's what Stark's sensors were reading, she said. Yes, Harry said, and you've been keeping it quiet since Azkaban. Not hiding it, Harry said, just not letting it all the way out. There hasn't been a reason to. He closed his hands and the violet faded and the temperature came back up. Paris is going to be different. Voss knows I'm coming. He'll have every magical and muggle defense he can assemble in the time he has. He's going to make it a fortress because that's how he thinks. And how are you going to think? Hermione asked. I'm not going to think like someone attacking a fortress, Harry said. I'm going to think like someone who can walk through one. She looked at him steadily. I'm coming, I know, and you're not going to tell me to stay here and coordinate from a distance. Would you stay if I did? Absolutely not, she said. Then I wasn't going to say it. He pulled out the photograph of Voss he'd taken from Wiltshire, the one from the function, gray temples, precise face, comfortable in the background. He looked at it the way he'd been looking at it for 3 days, not out of anger or obsession, but out of the same methodical attention he gave all problems. He framed me, Harry said. He sat in the gallery at my trial and watched. He buried the appeals. He ran the press campaign, and he's been doing things like this to people like me in both worlds for 30 years. Yes, Hermione said. I want to look him in the eye before anything else, Harry said, not for satisfaction. Because I want him to understand what he built before it comes down on him. She was quiet for a moment. That sounds like it might be slightly for satisfaction. Slightly, Harry admitted. Honest, Thanos said with that tectonic amusement. Hermione stood up and started packing her bag with the efficient thoroughness of someone who had packed for dangerous expeditions before and knew which parts were non-negotiable. We should go tonight, she said. If he's consolidating and we give him another day. Tonight, Harry agreed. But not late, early evening before he has time to complete whatever defensive arrangements he's making. She nodded. I'll need 2 hours. You have 3. She was done in 90 minutes. They were in Paris by late afternoon, emerging from an apparition point near the Seine with the early evening light going gold on the water, and the city doing its particular thing of being achingly beautiful in a way that felt vaguely like it was showing off. Hermione paused for exactly 3 seconds to look at the river and the light on it, and Harry let those 3 seconds happen because he understood the need for them, and then they were moving. The building was in a narrow street that was all formal gray stone and tall windows and the particular privacy of old money. The garden in front was walled, iron gate, the kind of security that looked decorative and wasn't. Harry could feel the wards from 30 feet away, dense, layered, interlocking, the best work he'd felt since Gringotts. Whoever Voss had doing his ward work was genuinely skilled. He stood outside the gate and read them. Impressive, Thanos said, and it was the tone of a craftsman acknowledging another's craft before proceeding to dismantle it. At least 12 distinct ward layers. Anti-apparition, anti-magical detection, physical barrier reinforcement, several offensive wards keyed to non-conclave magical signatures. There is also electronic security, cameras, pressure sensors, the Muggle kind, integrated with the magical. Someone has been bridging the 2 systems. Belvoir, Harry said. He's the bridge. What are you seeing? Hermione asked quietly, watching his face. 12 wards, electronic integration, it's good work. He paused. It's also built on the same fundamental assumption as Azkaban. It assumes the threat comes from outside and tries to push it back. And I'm already inside the threat model, Harry said. I have been for 3 days. He walked up to the gate and pressed his hand flat against the iron. And then the way he'd unraveled the Azkaban wards, but with considerably more power and considerably less patience, he reached into the ward work and found the assumption it was built on, that hostile magical energy would present at the boundary, that the measure of threat was the direction and nature of approach, and he changed it. Not subtly, this time. He didn't make the wards confused. He made them recognize him as the thing they were designed to protect. Every ward in the structure shifted keys simultaneously. The gate swung open. From inside the building, 3 floors up, a window lit brightly and then went dark. Someone had seen. Someone had just watched 12 layers of premium wardwork roll out a welcome mat, and was now having the worst realization of their professional career. Move quickly, Harry said. They went through the garden at a pace that was just below a run, and Harry brought the front door open the same way he'd brought the gate, and they were inside before the first of Voss's security personnel reached the stairs. There were 6 of them in the building. Harry knew this the way he'd known the Azkaban guard rotation, from the weight and movement of them felt through the structure. 4 were conclave operatives, 1 was Belvoir, and 1, in a room on the 3rd floor, was Aldrich Voss. The 4 operatives came downstairs in a coordinated formation that was professionally disciplined. They came with wands and with the other thing, Muggle weapons, integrated carry, the kind of dual capability response that Belvoir's bridging work made possible. They were fast and they were serious, and they were entirely unprepared for what Harry was. Harry walked through what they threw at him, and it hit him and ran off, and the operatives were left in a very professional heap at the bottom of the stairs, none of them permanently harmed, all of them comprehensively incapacitated, in about 45 seconds. Hermione handled Belvoir, who appeared in the corridor from a side door with a wand in one hand and a tablet in the other, apparently in the middle of trying to trigger an external alarm. She had him disarmed and restrained with his own wards folded around him before he managed the second syllable of the alarm incantation, and she did it with the efficient certainty of someone who has been an exceptional witch for her entire life and was finally being allowed to use all of it. Harry looked at her. "Nice, thank you," she said, slightly breathless. The third floor was quiet. Voss was waiting for them in a study that was all dark wood and ordered bookshelves, and the kind of deliberate calm that told Harry he'd had time to compose himself. He stood behind his desk, not sitting, standing, which was a choice, and he was exactly as the photograph had suggested. Gray temples Lane, a face that gave nothing away. He was older up close, and his eyes were the eyes of someone who had spent decades behind a desk making decisions about people and had learned to think of people as variables. Harry looked at him across the room. Voss looked back. "Mr. Potter," he said. His voice was steady, composed. "You've been busy." "I have," Harry agreed. He walked into the room and sat down in one of the chairs across from the desk, crossed one leg over the other, entirely at ease. Hermione stood near the door, watching. Voss looked at Harry sitting in his chair in his study in his building with his 12 wards in ruins and his entire operational staff incapacitated downstairs, and something moved across his face that he controlled very quickly but not quickly enough. "You sat in my gallery," Harry said. "At my trial." Voss said nothing. "I want to know why," Harry said. "Not strategically. I have the strategy. I know what you built. I know what it cost. I know every name in every ledger. I want to know why you were personally present." He looked at Voss steadily. "Was it curiosity? Confirmation? Did you need to see it happen?" A long silence. "You were the most significant disruption to a 30-year architecture," Voss said finally, and his voice was precise and considered even now. "The investigative work you did in the 14 months before your arrest was extraordinary. You found things that professionals with full institutional support had missed for decades." He looked at Harry with something that was uncomfortably close to genuine assessment. "I needed to see what we had contained." "And?" Harry asked. "And I was relieved," Voss said. "Which I now understand was premature. Something in that, the absence of apology, the professional candor of it, was almost more honest than Harry had expected." He sat with it for a moment. "He is not frightened of you," Thanos observed. "Or rather, he is frightened, but he will not show it and he will not beg. He has the pride of someone who has never been caught before." "You should know," Harry said, "that I have everything. The Wiltshire files, the ministry records, Pell's account documentation, the full correspondence with Belvoir and Morales." He watched Voss's face. The name Morales landed slightly. "Good. The architectural history of the conclave going back to the 1970s. Your manufacturing of my trial." He paused. "I'm not going to use it to prosecute you through existing systems. Those systems are compromised and slow, and you'd have it buried in 6 months. He leaned forward. "I'm going to use it to take everything apart. Every shell, every connection, every conclave node in every country. Not arrested. Ended. And me?" Voss asked, flat, direct. "That," Harry said, "depends on the next 10 minutes. Voss looked at him for a long moment. Behind his controlled expression, something was working, not fear, not rage, something more like the furious computation of a man who has just realized that every exit he'd prepared leads to the same place. "You're not a system," Voss said slowly. "You can't be negotiated with, can't be bought, can't be frightened." His eyes moved briefly to Harry's hands, where the faint violet was present at the edges, unhidden now, entirely calm. "What exactly are you, Potter?" "I'm what you built," Harry said. "You put me in that cell and gave me 2 years to become something you hadn't planned for." He stood up. "The documentation goes to Commander Frome at the DMLE, to Tony Stark, and to 3 international magical authorities I've already contacted. All of it, simultaneously, tomorrow morning." He looked at Voss. "Tonight you're going to write a full account of the Conclave's operations. Every name, every connection, every action taken going back as far as you can remember. Hermione is going to sit with you while you do it." Voss looked at Hermione. Hermione looked at Voss with the expression of someone who has read every document connected to him for 6 months and has very definite feelings about what she found. "I have paper," she said. Voss looked back at Harry. "And if I refuse?" Harry picked up his coat. "Then tomorrow morning the documentation goes out incomplete, and you become a variable that the various authorities receiving it will resolve according to their own methods." He headed for the door. "I would rather it be complete." He left Hermione with Voss and went down to the ground floor, and Belvoir was still sitting, folded in his own ward work, looking extremely sorry for himself, and the 4 operatives were beginning to stir in their heap, and through the tall windows of the formal sitting room Harry could see the Paris evening going dark over the garden. He sat in a chair by the window and watched the last of the light go. From upstairs came the sound of Hermione's voice, precise and relentless, and entirely without mercy in the way she got when she was extracting information from someone, which was not a sound Harry envied Voss experiencing. "She is remarkable," Thanos said. "You keep saying that," Harry said. "It keeps being true." Above the Paris skyline, Harry felt the distant movement of the helicarriers. Not close, not yet, but turning, repositioning with the purpose of something that has decided on a direction. They were running out of time before the convergence. He watched the garden go dark and thought about what came after and let Hermione work. Chapter 5. Convergence. Voss wrote for 4 hours. Hermione sat across from him the entire time, not reading over his shoulder, not prompting, just present, the particular presence of someone whose attention is total and whose patience is genuinely inexhaustible when the work matters. She asked 3 clarifying questions in 4 hours. All 3 were about dates. Voss answered them precisely and went back to writing, and by the time the Paris clock towers were striking 1 in the morning, he had filled 46 pages in a handwriting that was, Harry noted when he came back upstairs, surprisingly readable for someone who had spent 30 years making sure nothing he touched could be used against him. Harry read the first 10 pages while Voss sat back in his chair and looked at the ceiling with the expression of a man who has just handed over something irreplaceable and is not sure whether he feels lighter or emptier for it. The pages were comprehensive. They were also, in several places, worse than what Harry had already known. There were names in there that would detonate careers across 2 worlds, a sitting member of the Wisengamot, a former SHIELD section chief, 2 senior figures in the French ministry's Department of External Magical Relations. The financial flows touched 6 countries. In running through all of it, architectural, load-bearing, was Valentina Morales, SHIELD deputy director, who had not merely been a SHIELD handler for Bellevoire, but had been the primary conclave contact inside the organization for 11 years. She had approved operations. She had directed them. She had, in one specific case documented with the flat precision that characterized Voss's entire account, ensured that a SHIELD field team investigating conclave-adjacent financial irregularities in 2019 had been redirected onto a different case before they found anything useful. Harry set the pages down. "Morales doesn't know you wrote this," he said. "No," Voss said. "When she finds out the Paris building was breached, she'll assume you've been captured or turned. She'll move to protect herself." He looked at Voss. "What does that look like?" Voss was quiet for a moment. "She has a protocol," he said. "If the conclave architecture is compromised at the primary level, she moves the SHIELD intelligence on our joint operations into a classified annex that only she controls. It becomes her personal leverage against anyone who might prosecute her for the association." He paused. "She's had that protocol ready for years. She didn't build this for ideology, Mr. Potter. She built it for the day she might need it." "Where's the annex?" "I don't know the physical location," Voss said. "I know the access protocol requires her physical presence and a biometric key. She designed it so no one else could reach it. She will move quickly," Thanos said. "She has been watching the same indicators we have. The Paris breach will reach her within the hour if it hasn't already." Harry looked at his watch. Nearly 1:30 in the morning. "How fast can she move?" "Morales," Voss considered. "She has a standing emergency transport protocol through a private airfield outside Lyon. If she's already been alerted, 4 hours to whatever location she needs to reach." Harry looked at Hermione. Hermione looked at Harry. "Tony Stark," she said. "Yes," Harry said. He'd been avoiding this moment for 3 days, not out of fear, but out of the same strategic patience he'd been applying to everything. He'd wanted the full picture before the full conversation. He had the full picture now, complete and documented, and Morales moving to protect herself changed the arithmetic of waiting. He pulled out the communication mirror Hermione had given him 2 days ago, her own enchantment, keyed to a device she'd prepared, which she'd passed to Stark at some point Harry had not specifically asked about because he'd understood it would happen eventually and had chosen to let her manage the timing of it. He tapped it. "Stark." Silence for about 8 seconds. Then Tony's voice, alert in the way of someone who sleeps lightly and has trained themselves to be functional from a standing start. "Potter." "It's 1:30 in the morning. Paris," Harry said. "We're at the primary conclave location. We have Voss and a full written account of the entire operational structure going back 30 years. He paused, including Valentina Morales. A longer silence. The quality of it changed. "Say that last part again," Tony said. "Morales, your deputy director. 11 years of conclave operational involvement, documented, signed, dated. Voss wrote it himself." Harry let that land. She's going to run. She has a protocol biometric annex somewhere. She'll try to consolidate her leverage before anyone can move on her. We have maybe 4 hours. The sound of movement. Rapid, decisive. Something being put down, something else picked up. Friday, get me fury. A pause, then Tony's voice back to Harry, lower and faster. How good is the documentation? Good enough that if you read it, you'll understand why your internal audits were being stonewalled, Harry said. She was the stonewall. Another silence. This one had a different texture, the texture of a very fast mind rearranging a significant number of assumptions simultaneously. Send it. In the morning, Harry said. All of it to you and to Commander Frome and to 3 international magical authorities. Simultaneously. That was the plan, and it stays the plan. Potter, morals, Harry said. That's what you need right now, where she goes when the protocol triggers. Can you get that? The sound of Tony thinking, not silence exactly, but a particular focused absence of unnecessary noise. The Lyon airfield, Tony said, and Harry felt something click. She used it 18 months ago for a non-mission logged departure. Friday flagged it as an anomaly. I filed it and forgot about it. Give me 10 minutes. You have 5, Harry said. She has a 4-hour head start on whatever she's going to. 4.5 minutes, Tony said, and the comm went sharp with the sound of him working. Harry looked at Voss. Is there anyone else who needs to be contained tonight? Anyone who will move the moment they hear Paris is compromised? Voss thought about it with the focused honesty of someone who had already crossed the line and was now on the other side of it. Galt, he said. Evander Galt. She has copies of certain operational communications. She'll burn them if she thinks the structure is coming down. Where is she? Ministry flat, Voss said. She lives in the building. Harry looked at Hermione. Galt. I know where she lives, Hermione said, with a flatness that told Harry she'd been knowing where Evander Galt lived for some time and had been sitting on what to do with that information. She was already reaching for her bag. Not tonight, Harry said. Tomorrow, when everything goes out simultaneously. Frome handles Galt through proper channels. It's cleaner if it comes from inside the ministry with the documentation already public. He held Hermione's gaze. Can you trust Frome to move on it? Hermione thought about it honestly. Yes, she said. I think she read the level 9 files. Good. The communication mirror pulsed. Harry lifted it. She's going to a location in the Swiss Alps, Tony said. Private facility registered to a biotech holding company that Friday just finished tracing back to a shell that connects to guess who. Voss, Harry said. Voss, Tony confirmed. Which means she's going to the one place she thinks no one outside the conclave can find, and she doesn't know that the man who built the place just spent 4 hours writing a very thorough confession. A pause. I'm going to Switzerland. So am I, Harry said, a beat. Of course you are. Tony sounded like a man who had made peace with something. Coordinates, Harry looked at Voss. Voss gave him an address. Harry relayed it. 2 hours, Tony said. Don't start without me. I make no promises, Harry said and closed the mirror. Hermione had been listening. The Avengers, she said. Stark and whoever he decides to bring, Harry said. It's his organization that's been compromised. He is standing to be there, and we have. Harry picked up Voss's 46 pages and folded them carefully into his inside pocket. We have the documentation that makes all of it matter, he said, and I have a conversation I need to finish with Voss in front of Morales. He looked at Voss. You're coming. Voss looked at him. To Switzerland. You built the facility, you know its structure, and your presence makes the documentation unambiguous. Harry looked at him evenly. You can come willingly, or I can make it convenient. Either works. Voss stood up from his chair with the movement of a man who has decided that all his remaining options point the same direction. Willingly, he said with a dignity that Harry found, against his better judgment, marginally respectable. I'll get my coat. They were in Switzerland by 3 in the morning. The facility was built into the side of a mountain, the way expensive things in Switzerland tend to be, discreetly, expensively, and with a precision that suggested the architect had been told that visibility was a flaw. From the air it was invisible, which Harry knew because Thanos was reading the landscape like a topographical map, and the facility barely registered as a disruption in it. From the ground approaching up the mountain road in the cold, it was a series of low buildings behind rock, lights visible only in 2 windows. She's inside, Thanos confirmed, and she is not alone. 4 personnel, possibly more. She moved fast. Faster than 4 hours, Harry asked. She was already moving before Paris, Thanos said. The breach at the Paris building triggered an automated alert connected to her protocol. She was in the air before you finished reading Voss's first 10 pages. Harry looked at this new information. She knew we were coming. She knew something was coming, Thanos corrected. The convergence of events, your escape from Azkaban, the Wiltshire visit, the Pell contact, the Harwick situation, she reads operational patterns. She saw the shape of it developing and prepared accordingly. She's good, Harry said. Yes, Thanos said, which is why you should not underestimate what she has prepared inside that facility. Hermione and Voss were beside him on the mountain road, breath clouding in the cold alpine air. Hermione had her wand out, held low. Voss had his hands in his coat pockets, and the look of a man on a tightrope who has decided to walk forward because stopping is worse. The sound came from above, the particular deep compression of repulsor engines before they throttled down, and then Tony Stark dropped out of the dark sky and hit the mountain road 30 feet ahead of them with a thud that scattered gravel. Faceplate up, brown eyes scanning, landing on Harry, moving to Voss, registering and filing. This is him, Tony said. This is him, Harry confirmed. Tony looked at Voss for a moment. 11 years of stonewalled audits, he said. It was not a question, and it was not a greeting. Voss met his gaze. I'm aware of the damage. Are you aware, Tony said pleasantly, that a SHIELD team in 2019 came within about 3 weeks of finding your financial architecture, and someone redirected them onto a counterterrorism operation in Karachi that turned out to be a dead end, and 2 of those agents were killed on that operation because the intelligence that sent them there was fabricated. He let that sit for exactly the right amount of time. I'd like you to hold that awareness while we walk up this mountain. Voss was very still, then he nodded once. Good, Tony said. He looked at Harry. Thor's inbound. Natasha is already on the mountain. She went up 40 minutes ago. Quiet approach. She should be at the south perimeter. How many did you bring? Harry asked. Just the 3 of us. Tony closed the faceplate. This isn't an army operation. This is a reckoning. His voice through the suit was level and precise and carried the weight of someone who has been working towards something for 8 months and has finally been given permission to arrive. You want to lead, or should I? Together, Harry said. They went up the mountain. The facility's outer security was Muggle, cameras, motion sensors, 2 armed personnel at the primary access point who saw an Iron Man suit coming up the road and made a reasonably brave attempt at resistance that lasted about 4 seconds before Tony had both weapons disassembled and both men sitting on the ground looking bewildered. The inner security was magical, and it was the best Harry had encountered. Better than Wiltshire, better than Paris. Whoever Morales had hired for her ward work here had not cut corners on the northwest anchor. The wards were layered in a way that was also reactive. They read incoming magical signatures and adapted, which was sophisticated work that Harry had to genuinely respect even as he started taking it apart. It took him 90 seconds. He was getting faster. The ward collapse was visible as a ripple across the mountain face, a shimmer in the air that passed and was gone, and the moment it went, the lights inside the facility went from 2 windows to every window, and from somewhere inside came the sound of a protocol being triggered. She knows we're in, Tony said. She knew before the wards went, Harry said. The same automated alert system. It had read the approach and sent its warning. Morales was fast and prepared and had been in intelligence long enough to build her exits into her entries. She'll have a secondary position inside, something reinforced. Sublevel, Thanos said. The magical resonance below the facility has a specific quality, contained space, heavily warded on the interior rather than the exterior. She is below us. Basement level, Harry told the others. She's already there. They went through the front entrance. Tony took the door off its frame with a single repulsor pulse, clean and efficient, and into a facility that looked, inside, considerably more operational than it had appeared from outside. Clean surfaces, dedicated workstations, the kind of setup that processed serious amounts of information seriously. 3 more personnel tried to intervene in the main corridor and were handled by Tony on the left, Harry in the center, and Natasha Romanoff, who appeared from a side corridor at exactly the right moment and disarmed the 3rd operative with an efficiency that made the whole thing look choreographed. Harry looked at her. She looked back at him with green eyes that were calm and measuring and gave nothing away for free. Natasha Romanoff, he said. Harry Potter, she said. You've had a busy week. It's been a full few days, he agreed. The basement access is behind the server room, she said, already moving. I did a full sweep of the exterior plans on the way up. She glanced at him sideways as they walked. You're not what I expected. What did you expect? Something angrier, she said, given everything. I hear that a lot, Harry said. The server room was exactly where Romanoff said it was, and the basement access was exactly where she'd placed it. A reinforced door in the back wall that was both magnetically sealed and ward-locked. Harry undid the ward lock in about 10 seconds, and Tony's gauntlet handled the magnetic seal a second later, and then they were on stairs going down into a space that had been prepared not in the last 4 hours, but over years. The sublevel was a single room, large, with the particular feeling of something built to last beyond whatever happened above it. Walls of reinforced concrete, magical ceiling on every surface, a server array along one wall that was running active, and in the center of the room standing, not sitting, because Valentina Morales was apparently constitutionally incapable of being found seated, a woman in her early 50s with dark hair going silver and the bearing of someone who had been in control of rooms for so long that being in a room was itself a kind of control. She looked at all of them. Her eyes moved from Tony to Natasha to Harry to Voss, and when they reached Voss, something moved across her face that was the first genuine, uncontrolled thing Harry had seen from anyone tonight. "Aldrich," she said. "Valentina," Voss said. The one word between them had the weight of 11 years. Tony stepped forward. "Deputy Director Morales, you're being detained pending a formal, Mr. Stark," Morales said, and her voice was entirely composed. "You're going to want to hear what I have to say before you begin any formal proceedings." "I'm going to want a lot of things," Tony said. "Explanations are low on the list right now." "The annex," Harry said. He was looking at the server array. "That's it. Running active, which means you haven't moved it yet. You got here faster than you expected, but the transfer protocol takes time. You're waiting for it to complete." He looked at Morales. "How long?" Something shifted in her eyes. The recognition that the person in the room she had least prepared for had just read her situation accurately. 20 minutes, she said after a moment. "Shut it down," Harry said. "What you're asking me to shut down is 12 years of intelligence documentation on Conclave operations," Morales said, and her voice had moved into a register that was almost reasonable, almost the voice of a professional explaining a professional reality. "Not just what I did. What the Conclave did, what they did to magical communities on 3 continents, what they did to people who got in their way." Her eyes moved briefly to Harry's face. "What they did to you." "I have Voss's account of what they did to me," Harry said. "Voss's account is what Voss chose to write," Morales said. "My documentation is what I collected. Intercepts, surveillance, operational records that Voss doesn't know I have. Proof that goes considerably further than a confession written under duress in a Paris study." Hermione, who had been silent since they'd come down the stairs, said, "Is it real?" Morales looked at her. Something in the quality of the look was different from the way she'd looked at everyone else, the look of one intelligence professional assessing another. "Yes," she said. "Then shut it down, give us the access key, and let the evidence exist in the open rather than as your personal leverage," Hermione said. "If it's real, it doesn't need to be yours, it needs to be everyone's." A silence in the reinforced room. The server array hummed. Somewhere above them, the mountain was doing its ancient, indifferent thing. "She's not going to," Tony started. "Give me a moment," Morales said. She was looking at Hermione, and the calculation behind her eyes was running at full speed, and Harry watched it run because he understood what she was calculating. She hadn't built 11 years of leverage to hand it over, but she'd also built 11 years of leverage to survive a specific kind of threat, and the threat in this room was not the kind she'd built for. There was no negotiating position that worked against Harry, and Stark wouldn't deal, and the woman standing in front of her had just offered her the only thing that might actually matter in the long run, the chance for the evidence to be what it was rather than what she'd made it. Morales crossed to the server array. She entered a sequence on the keypad, long, complex biometric confirmation at the end, exactly as Voss had described. The transfer protocol stopped. The active indicator light went from green to amber. She turned. She held out a small black drive. Natasha crossed the room and took it. Morales looked at Tony. "I know what I did," she said. "I'm not going to tell you it was right. I'm going to tell you that I got in and couldn't find a way out that didn't end with me inside a facility considerably less comfortable than this one, and so I stayed in and built walls and told myself I was managing damage." She paused. "I was mostly wrong about that." "Mostly," Tony said. "The 2019 team," she said. Her voice didn't change tone, but something behind it did. "That's the one I can't. I know what happened to those agents. It's in the documentation on that drive." She met Tony's eyes directly. "I flagged the operation internally as compromised 3 days before they deployed. The flag was removed by someone above my reporting chain before it reached the deployment review. I didn't fight hard enough to stop it." She stopped. "That is not absolution, it's the full picture." Tony looked at her for a long moment. His faceplate was still down, but Harry had learned to read the stillness of the suit as a kind of expression. "It doesn't change what happens next," Tony said. "I know," Morales said. "But it changes some of the weight of it," Tony said, and that was the most he was going to give, and everyone in the room understood that. Harry had been standing back slightly through all of this, watching, letting it resolve at its own pace. There was nothing for him to force here. This was the Stark morale's reckoning, the shield internal wound being exposed to air, and his role was to have made it possible, not to direct it. He had Voss's account in his pocket and Morales's documentation on the drive in Natasha's hand, and between the two of them, the Conclave's entire architecture was documented completely, which was when he felt it. Not from inside the room, from outside the facility, from the mountain, from the valley below. A magical signature he hadn't felt in years, acrid and cold and layered with the particular texture of power that had been twisted from its source over decades of deliberate misuse. His wand was in his hand before he consciously decided to draw it. Everyone in the room read the change in him instantly. Natasha's hand went to her side. Tony's suit powered up half a register. Hermione said, "What? Someone's outside," Harry said. "Our people secured the perimeter," Natasha said. "Not your people," Harry said. He was already moving toward the stairs. "This is something else." He took the stairs two at a time and came out into the facility's main corridor and walked through to the front entrance Tony had removed the door from and stepped out into the alpine cold. The mountain was quiet, dark, stars above the peaks, snow on the higher ridges glowing faintly in the starlight. 3 figures stood on the road below the facility entrance. Harry had never seen 2 of them before, both in robes, both with wands drawn, both with the specific stillness of people who have been told to hold position and will hold it regardless of what they're looking at. The third figure was Evander Galt. She looked different from her ministry photographs. In person she was smaller, sharper, with eyes that had the calculation of someone who had survived 3 regime changes by being useful and had learned to read rooms faster than the rooms could read her. She was wearing a traveling cloak over what looked like Muggle clothes, which meant she'd moved fast and hadn't changed properly, which meant she'd been activated the moment the Paris breach was confirmed. Voss had told Harry to worry about Galt burning documents. He hadn't mentioned she'd come to the mountain. "Miss Galt," Harry said from the entrance. "Mr. Potter," she said. Her voice was brisk and professional. "We've been watching the facility for the last hour. My associates and I were prepared to intervene if the situation required it." "It didn't," Harry said. "No," she agreed. "It appears not." She looked at him with the calculating eyes. "I've spent a significant portion of this week deciding what to do about you. And I've concluded," she said, "that the architecture I've been operating inside has become structurally unsound." She said it the way an engineer discusses a condemned building, practical, non-sentimental. "I prosecuted you, Mr. Potter. I wrote the charges. I managed the Wisengamot relationships. I ensured the outcome." "I know," Harry said. "What I did not know," she said, "was the full extent of the structure I was serving. I knew pieces. I knew Voss. I knew the financial relationships. I did not know about the SHIELD connection. I did not know about the 2019 agents, and I did not know that what I was told were legitimate security concerns were in several cases manufactured specifically to manage you." She held his gaze without flinching, which he gave her credit for. "That does not absolve me. I want to be clear that I am not offering it as absolution. I am offering it as context." "Why are you here?" Harry asked. "Because I have documentation of my own," she said. "The Wisengamot proceedings. The internal ministry communications that preceded your arrest. The evidence that was prepared and the evidence that was suppressed." She reached into her traveling cloak and produced a thick sealed envelope. "Everything that proves the trial was constructed, which is rather different from a confession and rather more usable in any subsequent legal proceeding." Harry looked at the envelope. "She kept it," Thanos said, with the note of someone who has studied power structures for millennia and still finds certain human behaviors surprising. "All this time she kept it. As insurance, perhaps, but she kept it." "Give it to Hermione," Harry said. Galt's eyes moved past him to where Hermione had appeared in the doorway of the facility, and something passed between the 2 women that Harry could not entirely read. It was complicated and old, and had the specific texture of a thing that had been building for months across paperwork and blocked appeals and buried complaints. Hermione crossed the distance and took the envelope from Galt's hands. "This is everything?" Hermione asked. "Everything I have," Galt said. Hermione looked at her for a long moment. Then she opened her bag and placed the envelope inside with the same careful precision. She gave everything that mattered. "Thank you," she said, and it was not forgiveness, and it was not warmth, and it was also not nothing. Galt nodded once. "I'll present myself to Commander Frome in the morning," she said. "I expect the documentation release will happen before then." Simultaneously, Harry confirmed. "Frome, Stark, and 3 international magical authorities, first thing tomorrow." Then I'll be at the ministry at dawn, she said. She looked at Harry one last time, the calculating eyes reading him the way she'd read rooms for 30 years, and this time whatever she found there was different from whatever she'd found at his trial. "You're not what I thought you were," she said, "when I prosecuted you." "No," Harry said. "What are you?" Harry looked at her in the alpine dark with the stars overhead and the mountain around them and the warm weight of Thanos in his chest and the certainty of the documents in Hermione's bag. "Ask me when it's over," he said. Galt left with her 2 associates back down the mountain road, and Harry watched them go until they turned the bend and disappeared. Tony came to stand beside him in the entrance. "You're collecting confessions," Tony said. "Collecting clarity," Harry said. "It's different, is it?" "Confessions are for courts," Harry said. "Clarity is for knowing what you actually built and what it cost." He looked at the road where Galt had gone. "She's not a monster. Voss isn't a monster. Morales isn't a monster. They're people who made choices inside a system that rewarded those choices and punished the alternative, and they made those choices for long enough that the choices became the system." He paused. "That's the actual thing I needed to see, not the arrests, the shape of how it works." Tony was quiet for a moment. "So you could dismantle it." "So I could dismantle it," Harry agreed. "Not just this iteration, the shape of it. The thing that keeps building these structures wherever there's power and fear and institutional convenience." "You can't dismantle human nature," Tony said. "No," Harry said, "but you can make certain arrangements much harder to maintain in comfort." He looked at Tony. "Which is what the documentation does. All of it, public, connected, permanent, makes the next conclave more expensive to build." Tony processed this. "You've been thinking about this since Azkaban." "I've been thinking about it since I was 11 years old," Harry said. "Azkaban gave me time to be precise about it." From inside the facility, Natasha's voice, "Fury's inbound. He says he wants to be present for the debrief." Tony looked at Harry. "Fine," Harry said. "I'll talk to Fury. You're not concerned about that conversation." Harry thought about Nick Fury, the voice on the calm, tight, and controlled, the man who had built a global intelligence organization and watched it get compromised from the inside by someone in his own chain of command. "He's going to be furious," Harry said, "and he's going to be right to be. And then he's going to want to know what comes next, and we're going to have an honest conversation about that." He looked at Tony. "I'm not frightened of Nick Fury. Most people are," Tony said. "Most people have things they need from him," Harry said. "I don't." Hermione appeared in the doorway. She'd been inside listening, he suspected, for the last several minutes. She had her bag on her shoulder and her wand in her hand and the look on her face that meant she'd been doing 10 things simultaneously in her head and had arrived at a conclusion about most of them. "The documentation is ready to go out in the morning," she said. "I've drafted the accompanying letters for each recipient. I need you to review them." "Now," Harry said. "It's almost 4 in the morning," she said. "We have a few hours before dawn." "Yes, now." Tony made a sound. "She really is the voice of reason." "Context," Hermione said. "Harry, inside." Harry went inside. They sat at one of the facility's clean workstations. Hermione's letters spread in front of them, precise and careful and exactly right in tone, giving each recipient the framing they needed to understand what they were receiving and what it meant. And Harry read through all of them while outside the mountain held its silence, and inside Tony Paste and Natasha sat in a corner and reviewed the drive's contents with the focused quiet of someone who is learning things that change other things. And Voss sat against the wall and looked at his hands, and Morales stood at the far end of the room and looked at nothing. Harry made 2 changes to Hermione's letters. She disagreed with one of them, and they argued about it quietly and productively for 7 minutes, and he kept his change, and she added a qualifying sentence that made it better, and they both knew it. At 4:15, a helicarrier settled onto the valley floor below the mountain, with its running lights making the snow glow, and Nick Fury came up the road with 2 agents, and the particular energy of a man who has traveled through the night to arrive at a conversation he's been building toward without knowing it for years. He came into the facility and he looked at Harry Potter, and Harry Potter looked back, and neither of them said anything for a moment. Fury looked at Morales, he looked at Voss, he looked at the drive in Natasha's hand. "Start talking," he said, to everyone and no one. Harry pulled out Voss's 46 pages and set them on the workstation in front of Fury. "It's all in there," he said. "Start on page 7, that's where it gets specific about S.H.I.E.L.D. Fury sat down. He read page 7. He read page 8. He read pages 9 through 14 without stopping, and his face through all of it was the face of a man who has been in intelligence for 30 years and thought he'd accounted for every possible betrayal and is discovering he was wrong. Then he looked up. Harry met his gaze without expression. "How long have you had this?" Fury asked. "48 hours," Harry said. "I wanted the full picture before I brought it to you. You should have." "I had my reasons," Harry said, simply and without apology, because the shape of the thing he'd been building was visible now, complete, and the reasons were in the 46 pages and the drive in Hermione's bag and the letters ready to go out at dawn. Fury looked at him for a long moment. The eye that wasn't covered by the patch was sharp and exhausted and recalibrating at speed. "What do you want?" Fury asked. "Out of this, what's your price?" "My record," Harry said. "The Ministry charges, the conviction, the 15-year sentence, everything Galt built. Gone, formally, publicly, with the documentation that explains why." He paused. "And Hermione Granger gets formal acknowledgement that she was right and the appeals were illegally suppressed. In writing, public." Fury looked at him. "That's it. That's the floor," Harry said. "We can discuss the ceiling after the documentation goes out and you've read all of it and you understand what you're actually dealing with." Fury turned a page, read another. "And the thing inside you," he said without quite looking up. "The infinity resonance. What do I do with that?" Harry considered the question honestly. Thanos was present and quiet, the way he'd been through most of the night, attentive, patient, letting Harry work. "You don't do anything with it," Harry said. "It's not a weapon pointed at anything you're trying to protect. I am not Thanos. I am not going to snap my fingers and remove half the population. I am not interested in conquest or universal balance or anything that involves other people not existing." He met Fury's gaze directly. "What I am is someone with enough power to make certain structures impossible to maintain, and enough information to use that power specifically. That's not your problem. That's actually your solution if you're paying attention." Fury closed the pages, set them down, looked at the table, then looked at Harry. "We're going to have a lot more conversations," he said. "Yes," Harry agreed, "we are." Outside, the alpine night was beginning its first concession toward morning. The sky over the eastern peaks was fractionally lighter than it had been, not yet dawn but the suggestion of it, the edge of the idea. Harry stood in the entrance of the facility and watched it. "Well," Thanos said, from the warm space at the center of him. There was something in the word, not satisfaction exactly, not pride, something more like the recognition of a shape completed. "You built something tonight." "We built something," Harry said. "You did the building," Thanos said. "I provided the scaffolding." Harry watched the sky. Hermione came to stand beside him, her shoulder almost touching his, both of them looking east at the approaching light. "It goes out at dawn," she said. "At dawn," he confirmed. She was quiet for a moment. Then, "How do you feel?" Harry thought about it honestly. He thought about the cell in Azkaban and the torchlight stripe and the sea grinding on the rocks. He thought about the trial and Ron looking away and the 17 counts and the photograph of him through his kitchen window. He thought about Voss's 46 pages, and Morales's drive and Galt on the mountain road, and Fury reading page 7. He thought about what was left when all of that was laid out in the open, documented, named. "Clear," he said. She nodded. The sky got lighter. Chapter 6. The shape of after the documentation went out at 6:47 in the morning. Hermione sent it with the precision she gave everything that mattered, each recipient package sealed, labeled, time to arrive simultaneously, the accompanying letters calibrated to the exact degree of context each reader needed. Commander Frome at the DMLE. Tony Stark formally, for the record. The heads of the French, German, and Australian magical ministries, who had their own conclave-adjacent histories that the documentation touched. 3 international magical law organizations, and 1 copy, complete and unredacted, to a journalist at the Daily Prophet named Clarissa Vane, who Hermione had been cultivating for 8 months precisely, because she was the one person at that paper who had been asking the right questions and getting her stories buried for it. Vane's copy arrived with a personal note from Hermione that was 2 sentences long. "This is everything. Don't sit on it." She didn't sit on it. By 9 in the morning, the Prophet's website had crashed under traffic. By 10, the Wisengamot had called an emergency session. By 11, Evander Galt had presented herself to Commander Frome at the DMLE as promised, with her own documentation, and 3 Aurors had been dispatched to bring in 2 sitting Wisengamot members named in Voss's account. By noon, the British Muggle press had picked up fragments from S.H.I.E.L.D.'s press office, carefully managed fragments, Tony's doing, enough to confirm that a significant internal investigation was underway without disclosing the classified architecture, and by early afternoon, the story had that particular velocity that meant it was no longer controllable by anyone. Harry watched none of this from Switzerland. He was already gone. He and Hermione apparated to London at dawn, before Fury had finished reading the documents, before the letters had been opened, before any of it had the chance to become something that required his presence in a room answering structured questions. He had given Fury everything he needed. He had given Frome everything she needed. He had given the journalists and the international authorities and the legal organizations the tools. What they built with those tools was their work, not his, and his presence while they built it would only complicate the building. He went back to Scotland. Not Azkaban. He had no particular desire to see that island again, though he suspected he would eventually, when it meant something different. He went to the Scottish coast north of Portree, where he'd landed 3 nights ago, to the natural cove with the rocks and the smell of heather and the indifferent sea. He sat on a flat rock above the waterline and watched the morning come in fully, the gray sky brightening in stages, the water going from black to dark green to the particular shifting silver blue of a Scottish sea in early light. Thanos was quiet. He'd been quieter since Switzerland, not absent, not withdrawn, just settled, the way a large thing settles when it has found its center of gravity. Harry had noticed it on the apparition, had noticed it through the morning, and was sitting with the question of what it meant while the sea did its grinding, patient work below him. "You are wondering if I am diminished," Thanos said finally. "Are you?" "No," Thanos said. "I am considering," a pause that had geological weight. "I have spent the entirety of my existence as a force of action. The Infinity Stones, the plan, the snap. Before that, Titan. Before that, my conception of the universe's problem and my certainty that I was the one to solve it." Another pause. "I have never simply watched something be built, without directing it, without the outcome being mine." "And?" Harry asked. "And it is," Thanos said slowly, "considerably more interesting than I expected." Harry looked at the water. Again it dropped from a height, hit the surface with a precision that seemed effortless, and was gone. "You're going to tell me you've had a revelation about the nature of power." "I am going to tell you," Thanos said, "that watching you work for a week has done more to demonstrate the actual mechanics of change than anything I accomplished with 6 Infinity Stones." He paused. "The stones were blunt. You were surgical. The stones produced results that could be undone. What you built in those documents and those rooms cannot be easily undone, because it is made of truth, which is a more durable material than I credited." "That sounds like a revelation about the nature of power," Harry said. "Perhaps it is," Thanos said with that tectonic amusement. "I am allowed to learn things." "The most terrifying sentence I've heard all week," Harry said, "and I've had a full week." He sat on the rock for another hour, thinking about nothing specific and everything general, letting the past week settle into its correct proportions. The details that had felt enormous up close, the Azkaban wards, the Wiltshire safe house, Voss's study, the Alpine facility, Fury's face reading page 7, were finding their natural scale now, becoming the constituent parts of a larger shape rather than urgent individual emergencies. The communication mirror pulsed. "Tony." "Words getting around," Tony said when Harry lifted it. He sounded, for the first time since Harry had met him, genuinely tired. Not the performative exhaustion of someone running on too much coffee and deliberate momentum. Actually tired. Fury's had 3 governments call him in the last hour. The French ministry is threatening a joint investigation. The Wisengamot emergency session has already devolved into what I'm told is the most chaotic open proceeding since 1612. "That tracks," Harry said. "Morales is in SHIELD custody pending a full review. Voss is in joint SHIELD DMLE custody. Frome sent a team to collect him from the facility this morning." Tony paused. "The 2 Wisengamot members, they went quietly." "They always do," Harry said. "When there's enough documentation. There's enough documentation." Another pause. "You know, I've been in this business a while. I've built weapon systems and dismantled them. I've taken down organizations and built new ones, and I have never seen anything come apart this cleanly, this quickly." "It was already ready to come apart," Harry said. "It had been for years. It just needed someone who had read every thread to pull the right one first." "Pell," Tony said. "That was the right thread." "Pell was the first thread," Harry said. "Harwick was the second. Paris was the structure. Switzerland was the keystone." He looked at the sea. "It was always going to come down in one piece once you knew which piece to move. You learned that from Thanos." "Thanos taught me to think in architectures," Harry said. "I already knew about threads. Hermione taught me about threads." A sound that was almost a laugh from Tony's end. "I want to meet her properly, not in a field in Wiltshire. She'll tell you she's not interested in meeting anyone properly until the legal proceedings are underway and she's reviewed the full Morales documentation," Harry said. "But she'll be lying. She's very interested in meeting you properly. We'll arrange something." Tony's voice shifted slightly, the casual tone setting down something it had been carrying. "Your record, Fury's moving on it today. He told me to tell you that the formal expungement goes through the Wisengamot as part of the emergency session, Apparently Galt's documentation makes the original trial so comprehensively illegal that it falls apart on contact with any actual legal scrutiny. Should be done by end of week. Harry was quiet for a moment. He'd known it was coming. He'd made it a condition. He'd built the entire architecture around making it inevitable. And still, hearing it stated plainly in the morning light on a Scottish rock above a grey sea, something moved in him that he hadn't prepared for, not joy, not vindication, something quieter and more structural, like a load-bearing tension he'd been holding for years finally being allowed to release. And Hermione's acknowledgement, he asked. In writing public, going out with the ministry's official statement this afternoon, Tony said. Fury put that in the letter to Frome himself. Another pause. He said, and I'm quoting, "The woman was right about everything and the record should say so. Tell Fury," Harry said, "that I said he can be decent when he tries." "I'll pass that along with a straight face," Tony said. "One more thing, Thor wants that conversation, the one with seating. Tell him to pick somewhere without helicarriers," Harry said. "He suggested Asgard, but I told him that was excessive." Tony paused. "Edinburgh, day after tomorrow. He says he knows a pub." "Thor knows a pub in Edinburgh. Apparently he's been there 4 times, Tony said. "He has strong opinions about their mead." "Edinburgh," Harry agreed. "Day after tomorrow." He closed the mirror and sat with the sea for a while longer. When he finally stood up from the rock, the sun had found a gap in the clouds. Not warm, not the Mediterranean abundance of actual sun, just the Scottish version, pale and horizontal and entirely honest about what it was, and it lay across the water in a stripe that made the waves look briefly like hammered silver. He apparated to London. The flat in Islington was quiet. Hermione was at the kitchen table with 3 newspapers, a pot of tea, and the particular focused energy of someone engaged in the specific pleasure of watching something they built working correctly. She looked up when he walked in. "Clarissa Vane's second article just went up," she said. "She found the 2019 Karachi connection and ran it. That's Morales's involvement in agent deaths fully public." She paused. "It's over." "The conclave part," Harry said. "The conclave part," she agreed. She poured him tea. He sat down across from her and wrapped his hands around the cup and looked at the newspapers. His name was in 3 of the headlines. The tone was different from the one 3 days ago that had called him a convicted dark wizard. He read them. The Prophet's lead story was Vane's, comprehensive, precisely sourced, building the picture of the conclave's 30-year architecture with the clarity of someone who had been given good documents and the intelligence to follow them. The ministry's position was described as under extraordinary scrutiny. The Wisengamot emergency session was ongoing. Several names Harry recognized from Voss's account were described as unavailable for comment, which was the diplomatic phrasing for in custody or in flight. The second paper had found Harry's photograph, an old one from several years ago, looking young and slightly bewildered at a public function, and run it beside the headline "The Boy Who Lived Returns." He looked at it for a moment. "I hate that phrase," he said. "I know," Hermione said. "It was always about the dying, not the living." He set the paper down. "The living part was always just the period between attempts." Hermione looked at him steadily. "And now," he thought about it. "Now it might actually be about the living part," he said, for the first time. She held her teacup in both hands and looked at him over the rim of it with an expression that was very careful and very deliberate and had clearly been prepared in advance, which meant she was about to say something she'd been working up to. He recognized the preparation. "I need to tell you something," she said. "All right," he said. "When you were in Azkaban," she said, "and the appeals were being blocked and I couldn't find the thread that would unravel it, I came to visit. Once, they wouldn't let me in. I stood outside the main gate for 2 hours with the documentation I had and a legal argument I'd been refining for 6 weeks, and they told me the prisoner had declined visitor access." She set her cup down. "I went home and spent 3 days thinking about whether you'd actually declined or whether it was another suppression. I decided it was suppression, but I never knew for certain." Harry looked at her. "I declined," he said. She was very still. "Month 4, he said. "They came to me with the visitor access form. I'd heard nothing from anyone. I was still in the phase where the anger was hot and close to the surface, and I knew that if you came and I saw you in that state, in that place, with those bars between us, I would." He stopped, looked at the table. "I would have broken the wrong way. I would have needed something from you that would have cost you more than you should have had to pay, and I would have hated myself for it." He looked up. "So I said number, and then I put it away, and I became the version of myself that could survive the rest of it." The kitchen was quiet. "You should have let me come," Hermione said. Her voice was very even in the way that it got when she was keeping it even. "I know," he said. "I would have been fine. I know that too," he said. "It wasn't about whether you could handle it. It was about whether I could." He held her gaze. "I'm sorry. That's the only apology I have left that I actually mean completely. She looked at him for a long moment. The careful expression had dropped, and what was underneath it was not anger, or it was anger, but it was the kind that lived alongside love and grief, and 2 years of sustained effort and a refusal to stop, and it was all those things together which made the anger into something more complicated and more real. "Don't do that again," she said. "Make a unilateral decision about what you can handle. Protect me from things I've already decided to carry," she said. He looked at her. "All right," he said, and he meant it the same way he'd meant the apology, completely, without qualification, without the caveat that made agreements comfortable but hollow. She picked up her tea. He picked up his. Outside the Islington window, London was going about its enormous business, entirely unaware that in a kitchen on this street, the two people most responsible for the week's events were sitting across a table from each other, drinking tea and being honest, which was in its own way more significant than anything that had happened on the mountain. "She is good for you," Thanos said. Harry agreed silently, and didn't say it out loud, because some things didn't need to be said in front of other people, even people who were very large ancient presences living in your ribcage. The Wizengamot session lasted 31 hours. Harry was not present for most of it. He was present for the specific part that required him, a deposition, given via communication mirror rather than in person, because Hermione had argued correctly that putting Harry physically in the Wizengamot chamber while the session was already in uproar was an invitation to chaos, and Frome had agreed, and so Harry sat in the Islington flat and answered questions for 4 hours while the session ran in parallel. The questions were mostly about the trial, what had happened, what had been manufactured, the specific sequence of decisions that had produced the 17 counts and the guilty verdict. Harry answered them with the flat precision of someone who had 2 years and 3 months to organize the facts and no emotional investment in performing anything about them. He answered 31 questions. He was asked twice whether he harbored any intent to act against the ministry or the wizarding world, and both times he said no, in a tone that made the questioner move quickly to the next question. Frome asked one question that wasn't on the formal list. She asked it at the end after the formal session had concluded and the communication mirror was technically closed, but both of them were still holding it. "What are you going to do now?" she asked. Harry had been thinking about this. "I don't know yet," he said. "Honestly," she considered that. "I want you to know," she said, "that I've read the full level 9 files, the ones you told me to look at." She paused. "You were right. I should have found them years ago. I should have. A lot of things should have been different." Her jaw was tight. "I intend for them to be different." "I know," Harry said. "That's why I left the files for you specifically." A pause. "You could have kept them. Used them differently." "I could have," Harry said. "But what they're most useful for is building something better inside the existing structure, and that's your work, not mine." He held her gaze through the mirror. "You're a good Auror, Commander. The system failed you the same way it failed everyone else. Do something with that." Frome looked at him for a moment with those sharp, controlled eyes, and something moved in them that was too professional to be called emotion, but lived in the neighborhood. "Mr. Potter," she said. "Harry," he said. "Harry," she said, and it was an acknowledgement of something. Not friendship, too early for that, but the beginning of a thing that might become it. She closed the mirror. The formal expungement came through on Friday evening. It came as a document, official ministry parchment, seal of the Wizengamot formal legal language that Harry read once all the way through, and then read again more slowly, not because he needed to verify it, but because he wanted to feel each word land in its correct place. Charges dropped, conviction voided, record expunged. And at the bottom, in language that Hermione had drafted, and Fury had put in the letter to Frome and Frome had put in front of the Wizengamot without alteration. The proceedings that produced the original conviction are hereby deemed to have been conducted in violation of fundamental principles of magical justice, and the record of same is expunged in its entirety. Hermione's acknowledgement was in the accompanying official statement, in a separate paragraph, clear and formal and public, the illegal suppression of her legal appeals, confirmed and documented, with the statement that her work in pursuing Harry's case had been correct in every substantive regard. She read it at the kitchen table. He watched her read it. Her face went through several things and she smoothed all of them quickly and efficiently, and then she looked up with bright eyes that she blinked clear before speaking. "That's the paragraph," she said. "Yes," he said. "It's in writing." "It's in writing," he confirmed. She nodded, set the document down, picked up her tea. "Good," she said, in a voice that was entirely steady and conveyed approximately 30% of what she was actually feeling, which for Hermione Granger under pressure was a significant release. Harry said nothing. He understood that sometimes the correct response to someone processing something important was to be there and be quiet, and he was very good at being quiet now. Edinburgh was cold and bright on Saturday morning. Thor had chosen a pub on the Royal Mile that was genuinely ancient in the way of places that have absorbed enough history that history has become structural. Dark wood, low ceiling, the smell of something that had been brewing for centuries. Thor was already there when Harry arrived. He was always going to be first, Harry suspected, because arriving anywhere second would have felt wrong to him, sitting at a corner table with a tankard and the contained patience of someone who has the quality of time that comes from genuine age. Hermione came with Harry. Thor had brought no one. They sat. The publican brought drinks without being asked, which meant Thor came here often enough to have a standing order, which was one of the more unexpectedly endearing things Harry had learned about the God of Thunder. "You look different," Thor said, studying Harry across the table. "From Wiltshire." "From every perception I had of you," Thor said, "the infinity resonance has settled. When I felt it on the field it was present but agitated, like a storm inside a vessel that was not certain it could contain it." He tilted his head. "Now it is simply there, integrated." "It took a week," Harry said. "Thanos took years to integrate with the stones," Thor said. He looked at his tankard. He never fully integrated with them. The power was always slightly beyond the container. His eyes came back up. "You are different from him in that way. The magic you carry, the two systems have become one system. I have not seen that before. Technically they were always one system," Harry said. "My magic was the frame. Thanos' soul fit the frame because it fit the frequency." He paused. He'll tell you himself that he chose carefully. Thor looked at the space slightly to the left of Harry's shoulder, which was where most people instinctively looked when they were trying to address the presence rather than the vessel. "I have something to say to him," Thor said. "He hears you," Harry said. "Say it directly." Thor straightened in his chair. He looked at the space. When he spoke his voice was lower and carried a quality of deliberateness that was different from casual conversation. "You killed my people," he said. "You killed half of everything that lived." I stood in the wreckage of what that meant and he stopped. A long pause. "I know you are not unchanged. I know the defeat and the scattering and the year of drifting changed what you were, and I know that what you are inside this man is not what you were when you held the gauntlet." He paused again. "I am not ready to forgive you. I want you to know that I am considering it. The considering is the most I can offer." Harry felt Thanos receive this, the weight of it. The enormity of Thor's considering, what it cost to say it, what it meant from someone who had every right to a harder position. "Tell him," Thanos said quietly, "that the considering is more than I deserve, and I am aware of that, and I will spend whatever time remains to me in this configuration being worth the consideration." Harry relayed it. Thor looked at him, then nodded once with the gravity of someone who has made a formal acknowledgement. He picked up his tankard. "Good," he said, and then, with the shift that Thor made between gravity and the genuine humanness that existed underneath it, "Now, tell me about this week. The field in Wiltshire was the beginning, and I wish to hear all of it." Hermione leaned forward because she had been waiting for someone to ask for the full account with the patience of someone who had lived every second of it and had thoughts. "I'll tell it," she said. "Harry leaves out the parts where I was useful." "I don't leave them out," Harry said. "You summarize them inadequately," she said. "Tell it then," Harry said, and she did. She told it well. She told it the way she did everything, comprehensively, in correct order, with the context properly established before the action arrived. Thor asked excellent questions. Harry interjected twice to add things Hermione had underweighted, and once to correct a characterization of the Pell conversation that he thought gave him too much credit for the outcome. Hermione disputed this. Thor watched the dispute with an expression of deep entertainment. They were in the pub for 3 hours. When they came out onto the Royal Mile, the Edinburgh afternoon was doing its thing, cold, clear, the castle sitting on its rock in the distance with the timeless confidence of something that has survived everything thrown at it. The three of them stood on the pavement for a moment, not quite ready to be in different directions. "The Avengers," Thor said. "What is your position on them, going forward?" Harry thought about it honestly. "Not a member," he said, "but not separate, something adjacent." He looked at Thor. "You have a structure, I have capability. There will be things where those intersect usefully and things where they don't. I'd rather work that out case by case than sign something that puts me inside an organization when the last organization that had me on record put me in a cell." Thor considered this. "That is reasonable." He paused. "Tony will want a more defined arrangement. Tony and I will work it out," Harry said. "We speak the same language, different dialects." And Fury. Fury and I will have a longer conversation, Harry said. He's a man who needs to trust the structure. I'll give him the time to build that trust correctly rather than demanding it on a timeline. He paused, which is a very Thanos thing to think. Yes, Thanos said inside him unapologetically. Thor smiled fully, warmly, the smile that transformed his face. He held out his hand. Harry shook it, and the grip was brief and strong, and meant something. The way physical gestures mean something when the people exchanging them have been through a real weight together. Thor shook Hermione's hand with the same gravity, and Hermione, who Harry suspected had been slightly in awe of Thor since Wiltshire and had been managing it professionally, shook his hand back with the poise of someone who was absolutely not slightly in awe of anyone. Thor went up. Literally the hammer, the ascent, the wind, and he was gone in the direction of wherever he was going, which was somewhere that required flying rather than the tube. Harry and Hermione stood on the Royal Mile and watched him go. "I like him," Hermione said. "Everyone does," Harry said, and she laughed, genuinely surprised out of her by it, the way good laughter works, and it was the best sound he'd heard in 2 years and 3 months. They walked down the mile toward Holyrood, because it was afternoon and the city was beautiful and there was no particular rush for the first time in a week, and the ease of having no particular rush was something Harry intended to inhabit fully for at least the length of a walk. "The flat in Islington," Hermione said after they'd walked a block. "What about it?" "I've been in it for 6 months, she said. "I took it when the last appeal was rejected, and I decided I needed to be in London properly to do this correctly." She paused. "I don't know what it is now, whether I stay in London or I don't know." "What do you want?" Harry asked. She was quiet for a moment. "I want to work on the legal framework," she said, "the one that makes what happened to you structurally impossible. Not just this prosecution, not just this conclave, the underlying conditions that made both possible. The relationship between the wizarding legal system and outside oversight, the classification systems that allow evidence suppression, the appeal processes." She was building momentum the way she always did when she arrived at something she genuinely wanted. "There's an opportunity right now, with the Wisengamot under scrutiny and the ministry scrambling to demonstrate reform, to push through structural changes that would have been impossible 6 months ago. The window is short." "You've been planning this," Harry said. "Since month 14 of your incarceration," she said. "I needed something to work toward besides the appeals." He looked at her sideways. "And the non-legal part, what do you want? That isn't work." She was quiet for another half block. "I want to know what it looks like," she said carefully. "When all of this is not the immediate emergency, when you've had time to find out what you are now in ordinary circumstances." She glanced at him. "When you're not dismantling things." "I might just keep dismantling things," Harry said. "You might," she agreed, "but I'd like to find out if there's something in between the dismantlings." "Are you asking me something?" he said. "I'm suggesting a direction," she said. "You can decide if you want to move in it." He considered the suggestion. He thought about the coffee shop in Clerkenwell, and the Islington flat, and 3 hours in a pub on the Royal Mile, and Hermione telling the story of the week better than he would have. He thought about 2 years in a cell deciding that the world owed him nothing, and then walking out and finding, with a slight shock, that he still wanted things from it. "I want to move in it," he said. She nodded, not dramatically, not with the weight of a significant moment, just with the straightforward acknowledgement of someone who has asked a real question and received a real answer and finds both sufficient. "Good," she said. They walked on. The evening came in over Edinburgh, the way Scottish evenings do, fast, definitive, the light going from afternoon gold to deep blue in what felt like the time it took to blink. By the time they reached the Palace of Holyrood House, the floodlights were on, and the castle behind them was lit against the dark sky, and the city was full of its evening sounds, voices, music from somewhere, the particular alive hum of a place that has been lived in for a long time and intends to keep being lived in. Harry stood at the edge of Holyrood Park and looked at the city and felt the scope of what the past week had built, and what it had dismantled, and what it had left standing. "Tell me something," Thanos said. "Ask," Harry said, "the boy in the cell, 2 years ago. If you had known what this week would look like, would you have made the same choices? The same decision to wait, to build clarity rather than act on anger?" Harry thought about it honestly. "Yes," he said, "even knowing how long it was. The length was part of what made it work," Harry said. "If I'd come out of that cell in month 3, hot and certain and full of the wrong kind of power, I'd have burned everything and called it justice and missed the actual structure entirely." He looked at the lit castle. "The time made me precise. And precision is the only thing that actually takes something apart rather than just damaging it." "The snap was not precise," Thanos said, and there was something in the admission that was vast and honest and cost him something. "No," Harry agreed, "it wasn't. I believed precision was impossible at that scale, that only blunt force could address a universal problem. You were wrong, Harry said without cruelty. I was wrong, Thanos said. And then, after a pause of significant weight, I find that I am grateful for being wrong, which is a sentence I have never said before in any form. Harry felt the strange warmth of that land in his chest. The ancient, defeated, philosophically ruined Titan who had remade the universe with a thought, finding something like gratitude for error in the ribcage of a man who had sat in a cell on an island and learned to think in architectures. "You're welcome," Harry said, quietly enough that only Thanos heard it. Hermione, who had been standing a few feet away looking at the park, turned and looked at him. "Were you just having a moment?" "Small one," Harry said. "Good, you're due several." She came to stand beside him, looking at the lit city. "What comes next, practically?" "Tomorrow next week." Harry thought about it. "I want to talk to Frome about the ward systems in Azkaban," he said, "the ones that replace the Dementors. They're inadequate not as a punitive facility, but as a containment facility, which means anyone with sufficient magical skill could have done what I did. That needs to be addressed before someone does it with worse intentions." Hermione looked at him. "You want to improve the prison you just escaped from. I want to make it into something that actually functions as what it claims to be," Harry said. "There's a difference between a facility that punishes through despair and a facility that actually achieves secure containment while meeting basic standards of." "Harry," Hermione said. "Yes. You just escaped from Azkaban 3 days ago, and you are already developing proposals for its institutional reform. Is that strange?" She looked at him for a long moment. Then she started laughing again, and this time it was bigger and better than the first time, and it had in it something that was possibly the sound of 2 years of sustained and exhausting effort finally being allowed to find its natural conclusion in something absurd. Harry found himself laughing too. Not the cold, controlled thing that had occasionally surfaced in the past 3 days, real laughing, the kind that came from the same place that had recognized the gannet on the Scottish rock that morning and found the Edinburgh pub comfortable, and understood that the world was not just a structure to be dismantled, but also, occasionally, genuinely funny. "This," Thanos said, listening to the laughing with a quality that was perhaps the closest a Titan could come to wonder, "is what I was missing." "I know," Harry said between laughs. "Are you laughing at what Thanos said?" Hermione managed. "At what he said and at myself," Harry said. "What did he say?" "He said laughter is what he was missing." Hermione composed herself slightly. That's actually quite sad." "It is," Harry agreed, "and also a little funny. Both things," she said. "Most things," he said. They stood in Holyrood Park while the city moved around them, and the castle stood in its floodlights, and the dark Scottish sky was very full of stars, and neither of them was in a particular hurry to be anywhere else. Later, much later, when the week had become part of the structure of things rather than an urgent present, when the Wisengamot reform process was underway, and the SHIELD internal audit had produced its report, and the Conclave's dismantled architecture was the subject of 3 separate international investigations and several very thorough academic papers, people would ask Harry about the merger, about what it was like to carry Thanos, whether he was afraid of it, whether it changed him, whether the power was a burden or a gift. He never gave the same answer twice because the honest answer was different depending on which part you were asking about. The power was neither burden nor gift. It was a fact, the way the color of his eyes was a fact, the way the scar on his forehead was a fact. It was there and he used it correctly and did not perform complexity about it. The changing, that was more interesting. He had changed, and most of the change had been the accelerated completion of something that had been underway since a cell in Azkaban, and probably before that. Thanos had not made him what he was in that week. He had made him faster at becoming it. What he and Thanos were to each other, that was the question that genuinely resisted a clean answer. Not host and parasite, not vessel and occupant, something that didn't have a good word in any of the languages Harry spoke. 2 distinct consciousnesses that had found a shared frequency and built something in the resonance between them, each one more than it had been, neither one diminished. Once in a conversation that took place on a beach in Dorset on an ordinary Tuesday with nobody watching, Harry asked Thanos directly, "Do you want a body of your own again, if it were possible?" Thanos considered the question for a long time. "No," he said finally. "I have been alone in a body before. I have been the only intelligence in a vast physical form with absolute power and no one who spoke to me as an equal." A pause. "What we are is better. Even though you're the passenger," Harry asked. "I am not the passenger," Thanos said. "You are not the driver. We are both the road and both the travelers." He paused. "I am aware that is a somewhat labored metaphor." "Very labored," Harry agreed. I am ancient and defeated, and I have recently discovered that I can be wrong about important things, Thanos said. Allow me the occasional labored metaphor. Fair enough, Harry said. The sea came in and went out. The Tuesday went about its business. Somewhere in London, Hermione was in a ministry meeting arguing for a structural reform that the committee would initially resist and eventually adopt, because that was what happened when Hermione argued for things. Somewhere in Edinburgh, Commander Frome was implementing new protocols that Harry had contributed to and she had improved on. Somewhere in a Manhattan office, Tony Stark was staring at sensor readings that still exceeded his scales and had decided to build bigger scales rather than pretend the readings were manageable. Somewhere over the North Atlantic, Thor was flying in a direction that probably made sense to him. And in Dorset on a beach, Harry Potter sat with his back against a rock, and the sea before him and the warm, ancient, changed presence of Thanos in his chest, and the particular quality of silence that belongs to someone who has finished one thing and not yet begun the next, and who is, for the first time in a very long time, entirely unafraid of the space between. Not because nothing could touch him. Because he had decided what he was, and the world was still adjusting to that decision, and he had all the time he needed to let it. The sea went on.